They called her a traitor, a disgrace, who murdered 3 Marines in a friendly fire incident that the Corps said could never be forgiven. Corporal Tracy Shadow Sinclair had been living in self-imposed exile at a remote observation post in Jebel Al-Garat for 4 years. Dishonorably discharged after a classified mission went catastrophically wrong. When 28 Marines from Forward Operating Base Rampart found themselves surrounded by over 60 international mercenaries and arms dealers in Wadi al-Shams Canyon, every available asset was either dead, wounded, or hours away. That's when someone remembered the disgraced Marine living alone at 2800m elevation, overlooking the valley. What happened next took exactly 14 hours and 53 precisely placed shots from cliff positions that military tacticians had deemed impossible to reach, changing everything the Pentagon thought they knew about lone operator effectiveness and the true meaning of redemption. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The wind carried dust and the smell of diesel fuel across the observation post's weathered sandbags. Tracy Sinclair sat cross-legged on a frayed camping mat, field stripping her M40A5 rifle with movement so automatic her hands could have done it blindfolded. At 31, she possessed the kind of stillness that comes from spending years alone with nothing but rock, sky, and the weight of a reputation destroyed by lies. Her brown hair pulled tight into a regulation bun despite no longer having regulations to follow, caught the afternoon sun that hammered down on this forgotten corner of the border region. The observation post wasn't officially on any Marine Corps roster. It existed in the gray space between authorized installations and complete abandonment, a stone and sandbag structure perched on a cliff ledge that overlooked Wadi al-Shams, the canyon system that smugglers and insurgents have been using for decades to move weapons, fighters, and contraband across borders that existed more on maps than in reality. Tracy had claimed this space 4 years ago after her discharge, after the court-martial, after the headlines that called her reckless and dangerous. Master Sergeant Norman Fletcher had helped her build it up, hauling supplies on his ancient pickup truck during his monthly visits from his compound 15 kilometers away. Norman understood what it meant to need distance from the institution that had defined your entire adult life. Her portable radio crackled with routine chatter from Forward Operating Base Rampart, 40 kilometers to the northeast. She kept it on out of habit, monitoring the frequency that connected her to a world she no longer belonged to, but couldn't quite abandon. The voices were familiar in their professional cadence, even if the names changed every rotation. Rampart Actual. This is Viper 6. We are approaching grid coordinates. November Victor 37. Terrain is rougher than intel suggested. Over. Tracy's hands paused on a rifle's bolt assembly. Viper 6. That was Captain Zachary Porter's call sign. She'd never met him, but she'd listened to enough radio traffic over the years to recognize most of the officers commanding units out of Rampart. Porter had a reputation for being thorough, cautious, and decent to his Marines. Qualities that didn't always go together in officers who made captain by 34. Viper 6 Rampart Actual copies. Maintain current heading and report when you reach the canyon mouth. Be advised, intelligence suggests increased smuggling activity in your operational area. Stay sharp. Over. Tracy resumed her field stripping, but her attention had shifted. Increased smuggling activity in Wadi al-Shams wasn't news to her. She'd been watching the pattern for months. More vehicles moving through the canyon at night. More armed personnel establishing what looked like semi-permanent positions in the old Soviet-era copper mine complex that sat halfway up the northern wall. She'd filed reports through Norman, who passed them up through his old contact at Rampart, but whether anyone actually read them was another question entirely. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western ridge line when Norman's battered pickup appeared on the trail below, dust plume trailing behind it like a signal fire. Tracy checked her watch. He was early by 3 days, which meant something had changed. Norman Fletcher didn't break patterns without reason. She assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency and slung it across her back before climbing down the rocky path that connected her observation post to the narrow track that passed for a road in this terrain. By the time she reached the bottom, Norman had already killed the engine and was leaning against the truck's hood, his weathered face creased with concern, that he wasn't bothering to hide. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Norman had spent 22 years in the Corps before retiring with a medical discharge after Fallujah took most of his left hand's functionality. He'd never been one for small talk, especially not when something serious was developing. "Porter's unit?" Tracy asked, already knowing the answer. Norman nodded slowly, his gray eyes scanning the ridge lines with the instinctive caution of someone who'd survived too many ambushes to ever feel completely safe in open terrain. "Got a call from Patricia Brennan at Rampart. She's a new base commander. Smart woman, actually listens when people talk. She's worried about Porter's reconnaissance mission. Why send them into Wad Shams if intel shows increased hostile activity?" Tracy asked, though she suspected she knew this answer, too. "Because someone higher up the chain decided the intel wasn't credible," Norman said. And there was an edge to his voice that Tracy recognized. It was a tone he used when talking about the kind of command decisions that got good Marines killed. "Porter's got 28 Marines doing what's supposed to be a routine survey of smuggling routes. But Brennan pulled me aside yesterday and told me something off the record." He paused and Tracy waited. Norman never rushed important information. "Colonel Vincent Garrison has been making inquiries about military movements in this sector," Norman finally said. And Tracy felt her chest tighten at the name. "Brennan thinks he might have people feeding him intelligence about patrol routes and operational schedules." Vincent Garrison, the man who had destroyed Tracy's career, who had orchestrated the friendly fire incident that killed 3 Marines and pinned the blame on her to cover his own illegal arms dealing. The man who should have been in prison, but instead had slipped across borders and now ran mercenary operations for anyone willing to pay his rates. "He's here," Tracy said quietly, and it wasn't question. Norman's silence was confirmation enough. They both understood what it meant if Garrison had intelligence about Porter's mission. It meant the 28 Marines heading into Wad Shams weren't conducting a reconnaissance patrol. They were walking into a killing ground prepared by someone who understood Marine Corps tactics better than most Marines did. "Brennan can't do anything official," Norman continued. "She doesn't have proof, just instinct and pattern recognition. But she knows about you, Tracy. Knows what really happened 4 years ago, even if she can't say it publicly." "What does she want?" Tracy asked, though part of her already knew. "She wants someone watching Porter's back from a position that isn't on any official patrol route or fire support plan," Norman said. "Someone who knows this terrain better than anyone at Rampart. Someone who doesn't give a damn about chain of command or rules of engagement when American lives are on the line." Tracy looked up at the observation post, at the isolated existence she'd built from the wreckage of her former life. Then she looked at the radio clipped to Norman's belt, already imagining the voices that would soon be calling for help that wouldn't arrive in time. "When does Porter reach the canyon?" she asked. "Approximately 90 minutes, Norman replied. "He's taken the eastern approach, which puts him right in the path of that mine complex you've been reporting on. The one where all the new activity has been centered," Tracy said, her tactical mind already calculating sight lines and firing positions. "If Garrison set up an ambush, that's where he'll trigger it. High ground, overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes for his people. That's what Brennan thinks." "Too," Norman confirmed. "But she can't divert Porter without cause. And she can't send additional units without authorization. That would take hours to get, so she's stuck watching good Marines walk into a trap. Unless someone who isn't officially part of any unit happens to be in a position to provide overwatch," Tracy finished. Norman met her eyes with an expression that mixed concern, respect, and something that might have been pride. "I told Brennan I'd pass along the information. What you do with it is your choice. Nobody's asking you to put yourself at risk for an institution that threw you away, but they both knew that wasn't how it worked. Warriors didn't stop being warriors just because the institution failed them. Honor didn't evaporate with a discharge, and the oath to protect your brothers and sisters in uniform didn't have an expiration date tied to paperwork and politics. I'll need current intelligence on enemy capabilities," Tracy said, her voice taking on a professional tone that had been dormant for 4 years. "Whatever Brennan can share without compromising her position." Norman pulled a folded map from his jacket pocket, along with an encrypted thumb drive. Everything she has is on here. Satellite imagery from the last 72 hours. Signals intelligence suggesting at least 50 foreign fighters in the area. Probably more. Weapon signatures consistent with heavy machine guns, RPGs, and professional-grade communication systems. Tracy took the materials, her mind already processing tactical possibilities. Transport. My truck will get you to within 2 kilometers of Almanar Ridge, Norman said, referring to the cliff formation that dominated the northern side of Wadiel Alshams. After that, you're on foot across terrain that'll test everything you learned in mountain warfare school. How long do I have? Porter's unit will reach the canyon mouth in 90 minutes. Like I said, if Garrison triggers the ambush immediately, you'll have maybe 20 minutes of approach time before the shooting starts. If he waits for them to get deeper into the canyon. Norman trailed off, but they both understood the implications. Tracy looked at her observation post one more time at the small space where she'd existed in a state between exile and self-imposed penance. Then she started climbing back up to gather her gear. Some ammunition selection. She had 62 rounds of match-grade .308 Winchester, each one capable of reaching out past 800 m under optimal conditions. For closer work, her 6-Sauer M17 pistol carried 17 rounds of 9mm. Though she was close enough to need the pistol, something had already gone catastrophically wrong. Her tactical vest went on next. Ceramic trauma plates inserted into carriers that had been modified for the kind of extended operations where ounce counting meant the difference between mobility and exhaustion. Water, medical supplies, energy bars, and spare ammunition distributed across pouches that her hands could find by touch in complete darkness. The satellite phone Norman had left went into a reinforced pocket, along with the encrypted thumb drive. She'd reviewed the intelligence during the approach, using every minute of that 2 kilometers hike to build a mental picture of the tactical situation before the first shot was fired. Norman's truck bounced across terrain that would have broken suspension on any civilian vehicle, but the old Marine kept it maintained specifically for this kind of abuse. They drove in silence, both of them understanding that words would only dilute the focus required for what came next. Colonel Brennan gave me a frequency, Norman said as they approached the drop-off point. It's not official, not logged anywhere in the communications roster. If you need to make contact with Porter's unit directly, use this. He handed her a slip of paper with a frequency written in his careful handwriting. Tracy memorized the numbers and handed it back. Norman fed it into his truck's cigarette lighter, burning the paper to ash. One more thing, Norman said as Tracy gathered her gear. Natalie asked me to tell you something before I left. She said, to remind you that heroes aren't defined by what institutions say about them. They're defined by what they do when no one's watching, and there's no reward except knowing you did the right thing. Tracy felt her throat tighten at the mention of Norman's daughter. Natalie was 15 now, living with relatives in North Carolina, while Norman did his penance out here in the desert. The girl had written letters to Tracy during the worst months after the court-martial. Simple notes that never mentioned the charges or the trial, just talked about school and friends and books she was reading. Tell her I'll remember, Tracy said quietly. Norman gripped her shoulder with his good hand, the contact brief but carrying weight that transcended gesture. Bring yourself back, kid. I already lost everything that mattered once. I'm not interested in doing it again. Then Tracy was moving, pack secured and rifle slung, crossing terrain that rose steadily toward the ridge line that would give her a vantage point over Wadshams. The sun was lower now, shadows lengthening across the rocky landscape in ways that would provide concealment for her approach, but would also make target identification more challenging once shooting started. She covered the first kilometer in 18 minutes, a pace that balanced speed against the need to arrive in fighting condition rather than exhausted. The second kilometer took longer as the terrain steepened and the altitude made every breath feel like pulling air through cotton. Her radio crackled with transmission from Porter's unit as she climbed. Rampart Actual Viper 6. We have reached the canyon mouth and are beginning our sweep of the northern approach. Visibility is good. No contact with hostile forces. Over. Tracy checked her watch. Porter was on schedule, which meant Garrison's people were watching him right now. letting them commit to the canyon before springing whatever trap they had prepared. Professional ambush doctrine required patience. Let the enemy enter the killing ground completely before initiating contact, eliminating any chance of easy withdrawal. She pushed harder, ignoring the burning in her legs and the way her lungs protested the combination of altitude and exertion. Almanara Ridge rose ahead of her, the cliff face that would require technical climbing to reach the position she needed. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The satellite phone buzzed as she reached the base of the technical section. Tracy secured herself to a boulder and pulled it out, seeing Norman's number on the display. Shadow. She answered using the call sign that felt both foreign and familiar after 4 years. Brennan just received updated intelligence. Norman's voice carried urgency that immediately put Tracy on alert. Signals intercept suggest Garrison has at least 60 fighters, possibly more. They're not just smugglers, Tracy. These are professional mercenaries, former special forces from multiple countries, Russian, German, Syrian, Mexican. This is a coordinated military operation. The implications hit Tracy like a physical blow. Porter's 28 Marines were about to engage a force more than twice their size, composed of personnel with training equivalent to American special operations. This wasn't an ambush. It was a prepared defensive position designed to annihilate an American unit and send a message that Garrison's operations were protected by capabilities that rivaled official military forces. Does Porter know? Tracy asked, already resuming her climb with renewed urgency. Brennan is trying to reach him now, but something's wrong with his communications. She's getting interference that suggests active jamming, Norman replied. Tracy, if Garrison has jamming equipment, he's got resources beyond what we thought. This is bigger than arms dealing. Tracy's hands found holes in the rock face while her mind processed tactical implications. Communications jamming meant Garrison wanted to isolate Porter's unit completely, preventing them from calling for support or coordinating their defense. It meant he intended to eliminate every Marine in that canyon without leaving survivors who could report what had happened. I'm 20 minutes from effective firing positions, Tracy said, pulling herself up the cliff face with movements that combined technique learned in mountain warfare school with improvisation born from 4 years of climbing these ridges. Tell Brennan to keep trying to reach Porter. Even if she can't get voice communication through, he might be able to receive position updates via data burst transmission. Copy that, Tracy. Whatever happens up there, you did the right thing that matters. The call disconnected, leaving Tracy alone with rock, sky, and the weight of 28 lives that depended on her reaching those firing positions before the killing started. She climbed faster, her hands finding purchase on stone that radiated the day's accumulated heat. Below and to the east, Wadial Shams opened like a wound in the earth, its walls rising 400 m from a canyon floor that narrowed in places to barely 50 m wide. Perfect terrain for ambush. Perfect terrain for massacre. Tracy reached a ledge 200 m below the ridge line and paused to catch her breath while surveying the tactical situation through her rifle scope. The old copper mine complex was clearly visible on the northern wall, its abandoned buildings and equipment yards now showing signs of recent occupation. She counted at least 12 fighting positions established around the complex, each one offering commanding views of the canyon floor below. Movement caught her attention. Armed personnel, moving with the disciplined coordination of professional soldiers. She tracked them through her scope, noting weapons configurations that included PK machine guns, RPG-7 launchers, and what looked like a Dragunov sniper rifle being positioned on the mine complex's highest building. Her radio crackled again, this time with Porter's voice, but the transmission was badly distorted. Rampart Viper 6 taking fire casualties surrounded. Then the radio went dead, replaced by the static of active jamming that confirmed Garrison had initiated his trap. Somewhere in that canyon, 28 Marines were fighting for their lives against an enemy that had every advantage except one. They didn't know that a disgraced Marine with intimate knowledge of this terrain and a personal score to settle with their commander was climbing into position 200 m above them, preparing to do what she'd been trained for but hadn't practiced in 4 years. Tracy resumed climbing, ignoring exhaustion and fear and the small voice that whispered she was one person against 60. She'd been one person against institutional betrayal and survived. She'd been one person against court-martial and conviction and survived. This was just another impossible situation that demanded action despite overwhelming odds. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed up from the canyon as she pulled herself onto Almanar Ridge's highest point. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson that would have been beautiful if they didn't illuminate American Marines dying in a trap they'd never seen coming. Tracy found position behind a rock formation that offered concealment while providing clear sight lines to the mine complex. She deployed her rifle's bipod, adjusting it until the weapon sat perfectly level. Then she pulled out the satellite phone and inserted the encrypted thumb drive, downloading the intelligence package Norman had brought. Satellite imagery showed the tactical situation with brutal clarity. Porter's Marines had established a defensive perimeter in an old equipment yard 600 m into the canyon, using abandoned machinery and concrete barriers for cover, but they were surrounded on 3 sides by elevated positions that poured fire down on them from angles that made effective return fire nearly impossible. Tracy counted at least 15 separate enemy firing positions, each one manned by multiple fighters who moved with the coordination of professional soldiers executing a rehearsed plan. Her tactical mind calculated probabilities and came up with numbers that would have been hopeless if she'd let herself think about them. Instead, she chambered around, settled into her shooting position, and began the breathing exercises that would slow her heart rate to the controlled rhythm necessary for precision shots at extreme range. Her scope tracked across the battlefield, identifying targets and prioritizing them based on the threat they represented to Marines trapped below. The first target presented itself. A machine gunner on the mine complex's southwest corner, his PKM sending sustained bursts into Marine position. Range 247 m. Wind 8 miles per hour from the northwest, requiring a half-value correction left. Elevation shooting downward at an angle that required compensation for both gravity and atmospheric pressure differential. Tracy's finger found the trigger with pressure so gradual that she couldn't identify the exact moment when the rifle fired. The recoil was familiar, comfortable in a way that reminded her why she'd once been considered among the Marine Corps' most capable snipers. Through her scope, she watched the machine gunner drop, his weapon falling silent mid-burst. The fighters around him scattered, confused by a threat they couldn't identify or locate. Tracy was already moving, relocating 40 m to a secondary position before enemy counter-snipers could triangulate her muzzle flash. Professional opponents would adapt quickly, and staying mobile meant staying alive. Her radio, previously useless due to jamming, suddenly crackled with Porter's voice. Unknown sniper. Unknown sniper. This is Viper 6. Outstanding shot. If you can hear this, we are taking heavy casualties and require continued support. We have wounded who need immediate evacuation. Tracy keyed her microphone, using the off-roster frequency Norman had provided. Viper 6, this is Shadow. Continuing Overwatch in target engagement. Recommend you consolidate your position and prepare for coordinated assault once enemy coordination is disrupted. How copy? There was a pause, and she could imagine Porter processing the information that he had support from someone who wasn't part of any official unit or fire support plan. Shadow Viper 6 copies. All be advised we have multiple wounded, including one critical combat medic, is working but needs better cover to treat casualties effectively. Tracy's scope was already tracking toward her second target. An RPG team preparing to fire on the Marine position from elevated ground that would give them a clear shot over the defensive barriers. Porter's people were using for cover. Range 389 m. Wind now gusting to 12 miles per hour, creating variable conditions that would challenge even perfect shot execution. She adjusted her aim point, accounting for wind drift and the downward angle that made this shot even more difficult than the first. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropping into the controlled zone, where body mechanics couldn't interfere with trigger discipline. The rifle fired. The RPG gunner collapsed, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope. His loader grabbed for the launcher, try and continue the attack, but Tracy had already chambered her next round. 2 seconds later, the loader joined his partner on the ground. This time, the enemy response was immediate. Multiple positions opened fire toward the ravine where Tracy had taken her shots, their bullets impacting the rocks around her previous location. But she was already gone, moving to a third firing position that offered different angles and fresh concealment. Professional counter-sniper doctrine required mobility after engagement, never giving your opponent time to establish an effective response. Tracy had learned these lessons in training and proven them in combat before Garrison destroyed her career. Now she was applying that knowledge to save Marines who served the same institution that had thrown her away. Her radio crackled with new voices. Marine squad leaders coordinating their defense now that the immediate threat of the RPG team had been eliminated. She listened to their professional calm despite circumstances that would have broken less disciplined forces. Heard the small indications of relief that someone was providing support from a position the enemy couldn't effectively engage. Tracy's scope tracked across the battlefield, identifying her next target, while her tactical mind calculated the chess game playing out across 2,000 m of mountainous terrain. Garrison had the numbers and prepared positions, but she had elevation, mobility, and 4 years of studying this ground until she knew every rock and shadow. The sun touched the western horizon, beginning its descent into darkness that would change the tactical dynamics completely. Tracy had maybe 90 minutes of usable daylight for the kind of precision shooting that would keep Porter's Marines alive. After that, it would become a different kind of fight. She settled behind her rifle and began the methodical work of dismantling Garrison's ambush, one carefully placed shot at a time, knowing that somewhere in that canyon, 28 Americans were counting on a ghost they'd never met to keep them alive until help arrived. Or darkness forced both sides to adapt to new rules of engagement. The war had come back to Tracy Sinclair, and this time she was fighting on her own terms. Captain Zachary Porter presses back against the rusted hulk of a mining excavator, feeling the impacts of incoming rounds vibrate through the metal. At 34, he'd led Marines through 3 deployments, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the methodical precision of this ambush. His company was supposed to be conducting routine reconnaissance, mapping smuggling routes for intelligence purposes. Instead, they'd walked into a coordinated attack by forces that fought with the discipline and equipment of a national military. "Hammer, what's your casualty count?" Porter spoke into his radio, addressing Sergeant First Class Earl Bishop, who commanded 1st Platoon's defensive sector on the eastern side of their perimeter. Bishop's response came between bursts of suppressive fire, 3 wounded, 1 critical. Doc Marshall is working on Private Foster right now, but she took shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. He says she needs surgical intervention within the hour, or we're going to lose her. Porter closed his eyes briefly. Processing information, the commanders learn to compartmentalize, even when every instinct screams to feel the weight of subordinates bleeding under your command. Paige Fawcett was 22 years old, fresh from School of Infantry, eager to prove herself capable of the machine gunner role that many people still question women could perform effectively. Now she was dying because Porter had led his company into a trap that better intelligence might have prevented. Lieutenant Holly Duncan crawled across the debris-strewn ground to Porter's position, her uniform covered in dust and what looked like someone else's blood. At 30, Duncan had earned her commission through meritorious election from the enlisted ranks, bringing tactical experience that made her invaluable in situations where textbook solutions didn't apply. "Sir, whoever Shadow is, they just saved 2nd Platoon from getting wiped out," Duncan reported, her voice carrying the controlled urgency of someone managing fear through professional focus. That RPG team had clear shots on our thinnest defensive position. 2 more seconds, and they would have punched through our perimeter. Porter had been wondering about Shadow since that first impossible shot eliminated the machine gun position that had been systematically shredding their defensive barriers. The call sign wasn't any roster he recognized, and the shooting demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard infantry marksman qualification. This was someone with specialized training, operating from a position that shouldn't have been accessible without technical climbing equipment and extensive terrain knowledge. Shadow Viper 6 Porter transmitted on the frequency that had somehow remained clear despite jamming, that blocked their communication with Rampart, requesting tactical assessment of enemy disposition and your ammunition status. The response came after a pause that Porter recognized as the silence of someone relocating between firing positions. Viper 6 Shadow enemy forces estimated at 60 plus deployed and prepared defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. They're professional former military from multiple nations based on weapons configuration and tactical coordination. I count 15 primary fighting positions, 3 of which I've suppressed or eliminated. Ammunition status is sufficient for sustained engagement if I maintain fire discipline and target priority selection. Porter absorbed this information, while automatic weapons fire continued to hammer their position from angles that made effective return fire nearly impossible. Shadow's assessment matched his own tactical evaluation, confirming that they were facing an organized force rather than random insurgents. "What's your position relative to our perimeter?" Porter asked, trying to understand the geometry of support they were receiving. "Negative on position disclosure, Viper 6. Maintain your defensive posture and trust that I have overwatch on your northern and western approaches. If you need priority fires on specific targets, designate them and I'll assess feasibility." Lieutenant Brad Keir, who commanded 2nd Platoon, added his voice to the tactical network. "Shadow, this is Viper 26. We got what looks like a command element in the mine complex main building, 2nd floor, eastern windows. They're coordinating fire through handheld radios. Can you engage?" Tracy had already identified the position Keir described, watching through a cluster of boulders that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform. Range to target 1523 m through air that shimmered with heat distortion from the sun-baked rocks. Wind had shifted to quartering from the northwest at approximately 10 miles per hour, requiring compensation that pushed the limits of her scope's adjustment range. The mathematics of extreme range precision shooting occupied the calculating part of her mind. Bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, target movement prediction. But another part tracked the emotional weight of what she was about to do. These weren't anonymous fighters. Through her scope's magnification, she could see faces, expressions, individual human beings who'd made choices that led them to this canyon on this day. One of the command personnel moved to the window, exposing his profile for the 3 seconds necessary to issue orders to someone below. Tracy's crosshairs settled on center mass, her breathing cycle reaching control pause between exhale and inhale, where trigger discipline achieved its purest expression. The rifle's report echoed across the canyon, and through the scope, she watched the man drop, his radio clattering to the floor. The remaining 2 command personnel immediately dove for cover, their coordination disrupted by the sudden appearance of a threat they couldn't effectively counter. Viper 26 Shadow target suppressed. Their tactical coordination should be degraded for several minutes while they adapt. Keir's response carried relief mixed with professional appreciation for capabilities that exceeded his expectations. "Outstanding shooting, Shadow. That just bought us time to reinforce our weak points." But Tracy was already moving again, never staying in one position long enough for enemy counter-snipers to establish effective fire. She'd seen at least 2 Dragunov rifles among the enemy weapons, which meant professional marksmen who understood the same tactical principles she was employing. Staying mobile meant staying alive against opponents who possessed equivalent training and superior numbers. Her new position offered a different angle on the battlefield, revealing sections of the enemy perimeter that had been concealed from her previous vantage points. She counted additional fighting positions, adjusting her mental model of the tactical situation to account for forces that were even larger than initial estimates suggested. The satellite phone buzzed in her pocket. She secured her rifle and pulled it out, seeing Norman's number. "Go ahead," she answered, keeping her voice low despite the distance from enemy positions. "Brennan says she's got quick reaction force spinning up, but weather has deteriorated between Rampart and your position." Norman's voice carried frustration that matched her own assessment of the situation. "Helicopter insertion is compromised by wind conditions that exceed safe flight parameters. Ground convoy is estimated 3 hours minimum before they reach the canyon." 3 hours. Tracy looked at the sun now visibly descending toward the horizon that would bring darkness and fundamentally change the tactical dynamics of this engagement. Porter's Marines needed to survive 3 hours against an enemy that possessed every advantage except the disruption she was providing from positions they couldn't effectively engage. Casualties on our side? She asked, though she suspected the answer would be difficult to hear. Porter reports 5 wounded, 1 critical, Norman replied. Combat medic is doing everything possible, but the critical casualty needs surgical intervention that isn't available in field conditions. Paige Foster. Tracy didn't know the young Marine's name yet, but she understood what it meant when 22-year-old warriors bled out in desert canyons because command decisions and intelligence failures put them in situations where courage and training couldn't overcome numerical disadvantages and prepare defensive positions. Tell Brennan, I'll keep them alive until QRF arrives, Tracy said, knowing it was a promise that circumstances might not allow her to keep. But she needs to understand that once darkness falls, this becomes a different fight. Enemy has night vision capabilities based on equipment I'm observing. Porter's unit will be at severe disadvantage without air support or artillery. She knows, Norman said quietly. She's pulling every string she has, but the authorization chain for close air support in this sector goes through channels that are deliberately slow. Someone doesn't want Porter's unit getting help. The implication sat between them like unexploded ordnance. If Garrison had penetrated Marine Corps communication security deeply enough to know patrol routes and operational schedules, he might also have compromised the support systems that should have been responding to Porter's emergency with immediate assistance. I have to go, Tracy said, watching through her scope as enemy forces began repositioning to account for the sniper harassment that had disrupted their coordinated assault. Shadow out. She disconnected and returned to her rifle, tracking movement patterns that revealed the enemy's adaptation to her presence. They were consolidating their positions, reducing exposure while maintaining coordinated fire on the Marine perimeter. Professional response from forces that understood how to fight against superior marksmanship through discipline and tactical adjustment. Her radio crackled with Porter's voice, now addressing his entire command rather than communicating directly with her. All Viper elements. This is Viper 6. We are establishing consolidated defensive positions in the equipment yard. First platoon will anchor our eastern flank. Second platoon holds the west. HQ element maintains central position with casualties. Prepare for a coordinated enemy assault once they complete their repositioning. Conserve ammunition and make every shot count. Tracy listened to the squad leaders acknowledging Porter's orders, heard the professional calm that marked Marines who've been trained to function effectively despite circumstances that would paralyze untrained forces. But she also detected the underlying strain, the awareness that they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition, while facing an enemy that could afford to be patient. Corporal Reed Marshall, the 25-year-old combat medic who earned his call sign Doc through competence rather than irony, worked on Paige Foster with hands that remained steady despite incoming fire that impacted within meters of his position. The young private had taken shrapnel across her chest and abdomen when an RPG detonated against the excavator she'd been using for cover. The blast sending metal fragments through body armor that was designed to stop bullets, but couldn't prevent penetrating trauma from explosive fragmentation. Stay with me, Foster. Reed spoke, while his hands applied pressure to wounds that were bleeding faster than field dressing could manage. You're going to be fine. You're going to see your family again. Just keep breathing and stay focused on my voice. Paige's eyes remained open but unfocused, her breathing shallow and rapid in ways that Reed recognized as early indicators of shock progressing toward systemic failure. He'd treated combat trauma in training exercises and during his previous deployment, but nothing prepared you for the reality of watching a fellow Marine die under your hands because you lacked the surgical capabilities that might save them. Lance Corporal Chase Dixon, the radio operator who'd been trying unsuccessfully to reach Rampart since the ambush began, crawled to Reed's position with the aid kit that contained their last doses of morphine and combat antibiotics. How bad? Chase asked, though the blood pooling around Foster's position already answered his question. Bad enough that she needs a surgeon, not a combat medic, Reed replied, his voice tight with frustration that transcended professional composure. I can keep her stable for maybe an hour, but without evacuation, she's not going to make it. Chase was 23, young enough that death still felt like something that happened to other people in other units. But the evidence soaking into the desert sand challenged that comfortable delusion, forced him to confront the reality that courage and training couldn't prevent metal from tearing through flesh when violence became geometry and ballistics. Lieutenant Holly Duncan appeared at Reed's shoulder, her presence calm despite circumstances that justified panic. "Doc, what do you need?" "A trauma surgeon and a fully equipped operating room," Reed said, then caught himself, failing that. "I need her stable enough to survive until QRF arrives with proper medical support." Duncan nodded. Processing information the commanders learned to evaluate to the cold mathematics of resource allocation and mission priorities. Paige Foster's survival was important, but so was maintaining defensive capabilities that kept 27 other Marines alive against an enemy that was preparing for renewed assault. "Do what you can," Duncan said, gripping Reed's shoulder with contact that conveyed respect and acknowledgement. "You're the best combat medic I've served with. Document. If anyone can keep her alive, it's you." Then Duncan was moving again, crawling between positions to assess defensive preparations and maintain the personal contact that marked leaders who understood that morale was measured in presence and attention rather than speeches and empty reassurance. Tracy watched this interaction through her scope, seeing the small human moments that unfolded between the tactical considerations of fields of fire and target priority selection. She recognized Duncan's leadership style, remembered her own platoon leaders who'd managed to balance mission accomplishment with genuine concern for Marines under their command. Her scope tracked across the enemy positions, identify her next target through a methodical assessment that separated professional snipers from merely competent marksmen. A heavy machine gun team had established position on a rocky outcropping that provided elevated fire directly into the Marine perimeter's weakest sector, the northern approach, where scattered equipment provided minimal cover and crossing distance, required exposure to coordinated fire. Range 1, 647 meters through air that was cooling as the sun descended, creating atmospheric density changes that affected bullet trajectory in ways that required constant recalculation. The machine gun crew consisted of 3 personnel, gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition bearer. Working with the practice coordination of soldiers who trained together extensively, Tracy made calculations that balanced tactical impact against ammunition conservation. Eliminating the gunner would temporarily suppress the weapon, but the assistant gunner could assume firing duties within seconds. Taking both would require 2 shots in rapid succession, increasing the probability of enemy counter-snipers identifying her position through muzzle flash triangulation. She decided on the weapon itself rather than the crew, aiming for machine gun's receiver group, where a 50 caliber round would inflict damage, requiring extensive repair rather than simple crew replacement. More difficult shot, smaller target, but higher tactical value if executed successfully. Her breathing cycle reached its controlled pause. Finger pressure applied with gradual precision that made the rifle's report seem almost surprising despite absolute knowledge that it was coming. Through the scope, she watched the machine gun's receiver explode in a spray of metal fragments and mechanical components, rendering the weapon permanently inoperable. The crew scattered, abandoning their position, as they realized they'd been engaged by a marksman capable of precision that exceeded their own capabilities. Tracy was already moving, relocating to positions that maintained her mobility advantage, while the enemy struggled to identify her location among thousands of potential firing points across the ridgeline. Shadow Viper 6. Porter's voice carried new urgency. "We're observing what looks like preparation for a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Enemy forces are consolidating behind covered approaches on our northern and eastern flanks." Tracy had seen the same tactical development, recognized the professional coordination that marked forces preparing for synchronized attack designed to overwhelm defensive positions through simultaneous pressure from multiple directions. Porter's Marines would have to divide their limited firepower, creating gaps that attackers could exploit through speed and numerical superiority. "Copy Viper 6. She transmitted while scanning for targets that would disrupt the enemy's coordination. "Recommend you prepare for defensive fire's concentration on your northern approach. I'll suppress eastern attack elements to the extent possible, but you'll need to hold that sector with organic weapons." "Understood. Shadow, all Viper elements prepare for imminent assault. Designated marksman priority targets on enemy leadership. Squad automatic weapons. Prepare for suppressor fire on my command. Sergeant First Class Earl Bishop, known universally as Hammer, for reasons involving a bar fight in Okinawa that had become company legend, coordinated 1st Platoon's defensive preparations with the methodical calm of someone who'd survived too many firefights to waste energy on panic. At 39, Bishop represented the senior NCO backbone that sustained Marine infantry through situations where junior officers had the authority, but experienced sergeants had the knowledge. Richardson, get your saw a position where you can sweep that entire northern approach. Bishop directed Corporal Jake Hutchkins, who commanded the squad, anchoring their easternmost offensive position. Conserve ammunition until they're inside 200 m, then make it count. Corporal Danny. Ortega, who operated the M240 machine gun that provided 1st Platoon's heaviest sustained firepower, had already positioned his weapon to cover the most likely assault route. The 28-year-old had earned his reputation as the company's best machine gunner through competitions and deployment performance. But firing discipline would matter more than marksmanship when ammunition supplies dwindled toward empty. Hammer, I'm down to maybe 400 rounds, or take a call to cross their position. That's 3 minutes of sustained fire, maybe less if they come hard. Bishop processed this information with the calculating awareness that combat veterans develop through experience, measuring resources against tactical requirements. 400 rounds sounded substantial until you factor in the suppressive fire necessary to disrupt coordinated assault by forces that could absorb casualties and continue attacking to determination and numerical advantage. Make them count, Danny, Bishop replied. Short control bursts. Priority targets on anyone who looks like they're directing the assault. Let the riflemen handle individual fighters. Private First Class Tyler Grant, 21 years old, and on his first deployment, checked his rifle's magazine for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The nervous energy that marked inexperienced Marines facing their first designated combat situation manifested in repetitive equipment checks and constant position adjustments that more experienced warriors recognized as natural responses to fear. Grant, you good? Bishop asked, his tone carrying neither judgment nor false reassurance. Yeah, Hammer. I'm good, Tyler replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline that made his hands tremble slightly. Just want to make sure I don't let the team down. You won't, Bishop said with absolute certainty. That transcended optimism. You've trained for this. You know your job, and you got experienced Marines on either side who'll guide you through. When the shooting starts, remember your fundamentals and trust your training. Tyler nodded, drawing confidence from Bishop's presence and the matter-of-fact professionalism that marked NCOs who understood that leadership in combat situations meant projecting calm competence. Regardless of internal doubt or fear, Tracy observed the Marine defensive preparations through her scope, while simultaneously tracking enemy assault formations that were coalescing behind rocky outcroppings and abandoned equipment. She counted approximately 30 fighters moving into position for what looked like a 2-pronged attack designed to overwhelm Porter's eastern and northern flanks simultaneously. Her tactical assessment identified 3 priority targets. Personnel who appear to be coordinating the assault elements through handheld radios and deliberate positioning behind their subordinate units. Eliminating these coordinators might disrupt the synchronized timing that made coordinated assaults effective, forcing enemy units to attack piecemeal rather than simultaneously. Target 1 approximately 1580 m position behind a concrete barrier on the northern approach. Male mid-40s based on physical profile, carrying radio and what looked like a tactical map. His gestures and positioning relative to other fighters marked him as someone directing rather than simply participating. Tracy's first shot caught him center mass. The impact visible even at extreme range through the sudden collapse and immediate confusion among the fighters he'd been directing. They scattered, seeking cover while attempting to understand where the fire had originated. Target 2, eastern approach. 1, 712 m through air that was now cooling rapidly as the sun touched the horizon. Female fighter unusual in this context, which drew Tracy's professional attention. The woman carried herself with authority that transcended gender, directing assault elements with the confidence of someone accustomed to command respect through demonstrated competence rather than physical intimidation. The shot required maximum compensation for range and atmospheric conditions, pushing Tracy's equipment and skill to their operational limits. Her crosshair settled, breathing paused, trigger pressure applied with precision that had been perfected through thousands of practice repetitions and dozens of combat engagements before her career was destroyed by institutional betrayal. The woman dropped, and Tracy felt the complex emotional weight of eliminating another female warrior who, chosen this profession in military cultures that often question women's capabilities. Professional respect mixed with tactical necessity, creating the moral ambiguity that marked combat operations, where clean distinctions between right and wrong dissolved into gradations of gray. But there was no time for philosophical consideration. Enemy forces were advancing despite the loss of their coordinators. Individual squad leaders assuming command and maintaining forward momentum through training that survived leadership elimination. Professional soldiers adapted quickly, and the assault was developing even without centralized coordination. Viper 6 Shadow, Tracy transmitted while chambering her next round. Enemy assault commencing on your northern and eastern approaches. I've suppressed 2 coordination elements, but they're continuing the attack. Prepare to engage. Porter's response was immediate. All Viper elements, weapons free. Engage assault forces as they enter effective range. The canyon erupted with coordinated weapons fire as both sides committed to close-range combat that would determine survival through firepower, positioning, and the kind of desperate courage that emerged when warriors faced death and chose to fight rather than surrender. Tracy continued her overwatch, tracking targets that threatened to overwhelm Marine defensive positions while conserving ammunition for priority fires that could change tactical dynamics. Corporal Danny Ortega opened fire with his M240, the heavy machine gun's distinctive sound cutting through the cacophony of small arms fire. His tracer rounds walked across the northern approach, forcing attackers to seek cover and disrupting the momentum that assault tactics require for success. Beside him, Lance Corporal Derek Stone fed ammunition belts with mechanical efficiency, his movements practiced through countless training iterations that became automatic under. Combat stress. Shifting fire left, Ortega called out, his voice carrying controlled intensity of someone performing under pressure. The machine gun's barrel glowed orange from sustained fire. Heat waves distorting the air around the weapon as it cycled through ammunition at rates that consumed bullets faster than logistics could sustain indefinitely. On the eastern flank, Corporal Jake Hutchkins coordinated his squad's defensive fire with the tactical efficiency of a 27-year-old who'd earned his corporal stripes through deployment performance rather than time and grade. His rifle engaged targets with a measured cadence that marked experienced infantrymen who understood that accuracy mattered more than volume. Richardson suppressed that position at 2 o'clock. Jake directed his automatic rifleman, Grant, shift right and cover our flank. They're trying to work around our position. Private Tyler Grant moved as directed, his rifle finding targets with a mechanical application of fundamentals, learned in training, but never tested in situations where people shot back with lethal intent. His first shot missed, adrenaline and fear combining to throw off the marksmanship that had earned him expert qualification on known distance ranges. The second shot connected, and he watched the fighter drop. The reality of killing another human being hitting him with psychological weight that training couldn't fully prepare anyone to handle. Lieutenant Brad Keir, commanding 2nd Platoon from a position that offered overview of the western defensive sector, maintained tactical awareness through radio communication with his squad leaders while engaging targets with his rifle. At 28, Keir had graduated from Naval Academy with intentions of becoming a naval aviator before medical issues with color perception disqualified him from flight school. The Marine Corps had seemed like an acceptable alternative at the time, though moments like this made him question whether any career decision could justify the responsibility of commanding men and women in situations where his orders determined who lived and who died. Viper 22, shift your supporting fires to cover 1st Platoon's northern flank. Keir directed Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, who commanded 2nd Platoon's 1st Squad. They're taking pressure that's going to overwhelm their position if we don't redistribute firepower. Webb, at 36, the oldest squad leader in the company, acknowledged a professional brevity before redirecting his Marines to provide crossfire that would help suppress the assault developing against 1st Platoon's positions. His tactical experience from 3 previous deployments informed decisions that junior leaders might not recognize as critical until after circumstances demonstrated their importance. Tracy continued her precision fire from the RGL line, each shot calculated to disrupt enemy coordination and suppress positions that threatened to overwhelm Marine defensive capabilities. She'd expended 18 rounds, leaving 44 in her basic load, sufficient for sustained engagement as she maintained fire discipline, potentially inadequate if this fight extended to the night and into tomorrow. Her scope tracked across the battlefield, identify a new threat that sent cold calculation through her tactical assessment. A pickup truck modified with a heavy machine gun mounted in the cargo bed was positioning itself on elevated ground that would give it commanding fire over the entire Marine perimeter. The weapon appeared to be a DSHK, Russian Design 12, 7mm machine gun capable of sustained fire that would shred the inadequate cover porters Marines were using for protection. Range to target 1-823M, approaching the maximum effective range of her rifle and ammunition combination. The technical was moving, driver maneuvering for optimal firing position, while the gunner prepared his weapon for engagement. Tracy had seconds to make a shot that would prevent catastrophic casualties, or accept that Marines would die, because she couldn't execute under conditions that pushed beyond reasonable expectations. She made rapid calculations, adjusting for range, wind, target movement, and the reduced accuracy that came from engaging vehicles rather than stationary personnel. Her aiming point shifted to the driver rather than the more obvious target of the machine gunner, calculating that eliminating vehicle control would be more effective than attempting to hit a gunner who could be replaced by other crew members. The shot felt wrong even as she took it, her instincts screaming that the compensation wasn't sufficient for the extreme range and moving target. But sometimes combat required accepting inadequate solutions because waiting for better opportunities meant accepting worse outcomes. The bullet struck low, impacting the technical's engine block rather than the driver. Not the shot she'd intended, but the result proved equally effective as the engine seized and the vehicle lurched to a stop, smoke beginning to pour from the damaged motor. The crew bailed out, abandoning their heavy weapon as they sought cover from the invisible marksman who demonstrated capability to engage targets at ranges they'd assumed were safe. Shadow Viper 6. Porter's voice carried strain that professional composure couldn't completely mask. That technical would have wiped us out. Outstanding. Shooting under impossible conditions. Tracy didn't respond immediately. Her attention focused on the tactical situation that continued developing despite her interventions. Enemy forces were adapting, using the approaching darkness to mask their movements and consolidate positions for what would likely be a night assault when Marine visibility advantages would be eliminated, and numerical superiority would determine outcomes through close-range combat that favored attackers willing to accept casualties. The sun finally dropped below the western horizon, the rapid transition from daylight to darkness that characterized the desert environments. Tracy activated her night vision scope, the thermal imaging overlay revealing heat signatures that remained visible despite the absence of natural light. But her advantage was temporary. She'd observed enough evidence of professional equipment among enemy forces to know they possessed similar capabilities. Her radio crackled with Norman's voice, the satellite phone connection providing communication that remained clear despite the jamming affecting standard military frequencies. Tracy Brennan has. Authorization for close air support. 2 Apache helicopters are spinning up at Rampart. Estimated 45 minutes to your position. 45 minutes. Tracy looked at the Marine perimeter, calculating whether Porter's unit could survive another 45 minutes against an enemy that was preparing for renewed assault under cover of darkness. Tell Brennan to hurry, she replied, knowing it was inadequate, but unable to offer better guidance. were running out of time and ammunition. The night settled over Wadi al-Shams like a shroud, and somewhere in the darkness, Vincent Garrison was preparing his final assault on the Marines who'd stumbled into his operation. Tracy settled deeper into her position, conserving body heat against the temperature drop that would make the next hours miserable. Even before accounting for the tactical situation, she keyed her microphone, addressing Porter directly on their secure frequency. Viper 6 Shadow, prepare your people for night assault. Enemy has thermal capabilities and numerical advantage. QRF is 45 minutes out. You need to hold until then. Porter's response carried the weight of command responsibility that couldn't be delegated or shared. Copy Shadow will hold. We don't have any other choice. Darkness transformed the canyon into a landscape of shadows and thermal signatures where depth perception became guesswork, and every sound carried amplified threat. Tracy adjusted her thermal scope, watching heat patterns shift as enemy forces repositioned for the assault that darkness would favor. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, her breath now visible in small clouds that could betray her position if she wasn't careful about positioning relative to background terrain. Her satellite phone vibrated silently against her chest. She pulled it out, seeing a text message from Norman rather than a call that might compromise her concealment through audible conversation. Brennan received intel from Signals Intercept. Garrison personally commanding the operation. He knows you're there. Mentioned you by name on encrypted channel we cracked. This isn't just about the Marines anymore. He's hunting you specifically. Tracy stared at the message, feeling the weight of 4 years collapse into this moment. Vincent Garrison had destroyed her career, murdered 3 Marines to cover his crimes, and escaped justice through connections that reached high enough to make evidence disappear, and witnesses recant testimony. Now, he was here orchestrating the elimination of 28 Americans, while simultaneously trying to kill the one person who could testify about his original betrayal. She typed a response with cold fingers that made the small keyboard difficult to navigate. Let him hunt. I've had 4 years to learn this terrain. He's operating in my backyard now. But bravado felt hollow when measured against tactical reality. Garrison commanded 60-plus professional fighters with equipment and training that matched American special operations capabilities. She was one person with 44 rounds of ammunition and a defensive perimeter that was deteriorating under sustained pressure. Movement caught her attention to the thermal scope, a heat signature moving with deliberate caution along a route that suggested advanced reconnaissance rather than assault preparation. The figure carried a rifle configured for precision work, moved with the fluid efficiency of someone comfortable operating alone in hostile terrain, and was approaching from an angle that would eventually provide sightlines to her position. Counter sniper. Professional hunters sent to locate and eliminate her, while main assault forces kept Porter's Marines occupied. Tracy watched the figure's movement pattern, recognizing techniques she'd learned in the same schools from the same instructors. This wasn't random mercenary work. This was someone with credentials. She keyed her radio to Porter's frequency, while keeping her scope trained on the approaching hunter. Viper 6, be advised, I have enemy sniper moving to establish overwatch position on your northern flank. I'm relocating to address this threat. Your defensive fires will be without my support for approximately 10 minutes. Porter's response came immediately, tension evident despite professional composure. Shadow, we're barely holding as it is. Can you engage the sniper from your current position? Negative. He's specifically hunting me, which means he knows approximately where I've been operating. If I stay in this position, he'll locate me and I'll be combat ineffective. Better to relocate and maintain operational capability. There was a pause before Porter replied. Understood. We'll hold. Do what you need to do. Tracy secured her rifle and began moving laterally along the ridgeline, using terrain features that provided concealment while allowing her to maintain observation of the approaching counter-sniper. Whoever he was, he possessed skills that demanded respect and tactical caution. Underestimating professional opponents got you killed regardless of confidence in your own abilities. Below in the Marine perimeter, Corporal Reed Marshall worked on his 4th casualty of the engagement, applying field dressings to Lance Corporal Brian Foster's shoulder wound, while simultaneously monitoring Paige Foster's deteriorating condition. The young private had stabilized temporarily through aggressive fluid replacement and pain management, but Reed knew he was delaying the inevitable rather than preventing it. She needed surgical intervention that wouldn't arrive before her injuries progressed beyond field medicine's capability to sustain life. "Doc, how's Foster doing?" Lieutenant Holly Duncan asked, crawling to Reed's position during a lull in incoming fire. Reed looked up from Brian's shoulder, his face illuminated by the red filter flashlight. He was using to preserve night vision. "Brian will be fine. Through and through, missed major vessels. But Paige..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would acknowledge failure despite maximum effort. Duncan placed her hand on his shoulder, the contact conveying understanding that transcended words. "You're doing everything possible. No one could ask for more." "Everything possible isn't enough when what's needed is a trauma surgeon in a hospital," Reed said, frustration bleeding through professional composure. "I became a medic to save lives, Lieutenant. Watching people die because I lack the tools and training to help them tears me apart." Duncan had no answer that would ease the guilt that combat medics carried when casualties exceeded their capabilities. She'd lost Marines under her command during previous deployments, knew the weight of responsibility that came with leadership positions, where your decisions determine outcomes you couldn't control. All she could offer was presence and acknowledgement that his effort mattered even when results proved inadequate. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb moved between 2nd Platoon's fighting positions, checking ammunition supplies and redistributing remaining magazines to ensure each position maintained minimum combat loads. At 36, Webb had developed a logistical awareness that separated experienced NCOs from younger leaders who focus on tactics, while ignoring the mundane mathematics of ammunition expenditure and supply sustainability. "Sir, we're down to approximately 30 rounds per rifle, maybe 200 rounds to the saw, and Ortega's machine gun is nearly dry," Webb reported to Lieutenant Brad Kemper. "If they hit us again with the same intensity, we got maybe 5 minutes of defensive fire before we're down to pistols and harsh language." Keir processed this information with the calculating awareness that junior officers learn through experience measuring tactical requirements against available resources. Consolidate ammunition from casualties and non-essential personnel. Anyone not actively engaged in defensive fires surrenders their magazines to frontline positions. It was brutal mathematics, taking ammunition from wounded Marines and support personnel to sustain the defensive capability that kept everyone alive. But combat situations demanded prioritization that PCE morality would reject as callous or cruel. Lance Corporal Chase Dixon, the radio operator who'd been trying unsuccessfully to reach Rampart through enemy jamming, suddenly sat upright as his equipment crackled with clear transmission. Viper 6, Viper 6. This is Warhawk 17. We are 2 Apache helicopters inbound your position. ETA 30 minutes request tactical situation update and target priorities over. Porter grabbed the handset with relief that momentarily overwhelmed command discipline. Warhawk 17, Viper 6. We are surrounded and heavily engaged by approximately 60 hostiles with professional equipment and training. 5 wounded, including 1 critical. We are critically low on ammunition and require immediate fire support on enemy positions surrounding our perimeter. Copy Viper 6. Be advised we are monitoring communications between enemy forces. They are aware of our approach and have initiated countermeasures. We will prosecute targets as able, but enemy possesses manpad's capability that will restrict our engagement parameters. Porter felt the brief surge of hope drain away as tactical reality reasserted itself. Manpads, man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles designed to kill helicopters if Garrison's forces possessed that capability. The Apache support would be limited to standoff ranges that reduce their effectiveness against dug-in positions. Warhawk Viper 6 copies. Be advised we have unknown friendly call sign Shadow, providing sniper support from elevated positions north of our perimeter. Recommend coordination to prevent blue engagement. Viper 6 Warhawk copies. What is Shadow's position in authentication? Porter realized he had no answer to provide. Shadow had never disclosed her position, and he possessed no authentication codes for someone who wasn't officially part of any unit or command structure. For all he knew, Shadow could be an intelligence asset, a contractor, or something else entirely outside normal military organization. Warhawk unable to authenticate. Shadow has been providing precision fires from elevated positions for the past 4 hours. Extremely effective. No indicators of hostile intent. Requests you Deacon lick through observation rather than engagement. There was a pause before the Apache pilot responded. Copy Viper 6. We'll keep our eyes open. Tracy had covered 200 m along the ridgeline, moving through terrain that required constant attention to avoid creating noise or silhouettes that would betray her location. The counter-sniper was still approaching his route, suggesting he'd identified her general operating area through careful observation of her muzzle flash patterns and probable firing positions. She found a position behind a rock formation that offered concealment, while providing clear sight lines to the route the enemy sniper would need to traverse to reach firing positions overlooking the marine perimeter. Range approximately 600 meters, close enough that thermal imaging would be less effective than direct observation, creating an engagement where human factors like patience and tactical instinct would determine outcomes. Her radio crackled with a voice she didn't recognize, speaking on a frequency she'd been using to communicate with Porter. Shadow, this is Logan Harper. I'm the sniper you've been dancing with for the past hour. Former Marine Scout Sniper School, Class 2 to 14. I trained at the same place as you did. Learned from the same instructors. And I know exactly who you are, Corporal Sinclair. Tracy felt cold realization settle into her stomach. Logan Harper. She'd heard the name during her time at Scout Sniper School, an instructor's pet who graduated top of his class before doing 3 deployments and then disappearing into the contractor world. Skilled professional, and now working for Vincent Garrison, hunting her through darkness on terrain that should have given her every advantage. You've got me at a disadvantage, Harper, she transmitted back, keeping her voice neutral. You know my name, but all I know about you is that you're working for a traitor who murders Marines to cover his crimes. Harper's response carried dark amusement. Garrison told me you'd try the moral high ground approach, but we both know you're not exactly the Corps' favorite daughter. Dishonorable discharge, court-martial, for killing 3 of your own people. You and I aren't that different, Sinclair. We both learned the same skills. We both got burned by the institution, and we both found ways to keep using those skills outside official channels. There's one difference, Tracy replied. I was framed. You chose this. Did you though? Because I've read the classified files, seen the evidence that convicted you. You took a shot that killed an undercover CIA asset and 2 Marines who were in proximity. That's not frame-up territory. That's catastrophic judgment failure. Tracy's jaw tightened against words that reopened wounds she'd spent 4 years trying to process. The official narrative had been professionally constructed, evidence carefully arranged to paint her as a rogue operator who'd exceeded authority and ignored proper target verification. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that she'd been following orders from commanders who'd been deliberately kept uninformed about CIA operations, that the targeting package had been falsified by Garrison to eliminate witnesses to his illegal activities. Believe what you want, Harper. Doesn't change the fact that you're about to die on this mountain. His laugh came through with genuine appreciation. There's the confidence I expected. But here's the tactical situation. Sinclair, I've got thermal imaging that shows your heat signature, night vision that gives me clear observation despite darkness, and support from 60 fighters who can suppress any position you try to use. You're good, maybe even great, but you're alone against a professional team that's specifically prepared to kill you. Tracy didn't respond immediately, instead using the conversation to triangulate Harper's position through radio signal direction finding. He was approximately 400 meters to her east, positioned in a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment and overlapping sight lines toward her previous firing positions. Professional selection of ground that demonstrated the tactical competence Garrison would require from personnel assigned to eliminate her. Tell me something, Harper, she transmitted while beginning to move laterally toward a position that would provide different angles on his location. When you sign up to work for Garrison, did he mention that his operation involves eliminating American Marines? Or did you think this was just another contracted job with plausible deniability? Garrison pays better than the Corps ever did, and he doesn't burden his people with rules of engagement written by lawyers who've never been shot at, Harper replied. Those Marines down there had the bad luck to stumble into an operation they weren't supposed to know existed. Professional soldiers understand that sometimes good people die because they're in the wrong place at wrong time. Professional soldiers also understand honor, loyalty, and refusing orders to murder fellow Americans. Quote, Tracy countered, but I guess Scout Sniper School didn't cover that part of the curriculum. She was moving as she spoke, using conversation to mask the sounds of her repositioning, while Harper remained stationary in his apparently secure location. The amateur mistake. Assuming that verbal engagement meant static positioning, professional hunters understood that communication was weapon, tool, and misdirection simultaneously. Tracy reached a position 150 m from where she'd been when the conversation started, now holding angles on Harper's location that he wouldn't have anticipated based on her previous transmissions. Range 380 m through darkness that thermal imaging penetrated him perfectly. She could see his heat signature. But the boulder cluster created distortion that made precise shot placement challenging. You've gone quiet, Sinclair, Harper transmitted. Running out of moral arguments are finally accepting that you're outmatched. Just thinking about how many former Marines I've had to watch betray everything they claim to believe in. Tracy replied while settling into a prone position that minimized her thermal signature by reducing exposed body surface. It never stops being disappointing. Her scope tracked Harper's position, watching for the moment when he would shift or expose himself through movement that professional concealment couldn't completely eliminate. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon. The willingness to wait hours for the 3-second opportunity that determined success or failure. Harper's heat signature shifted slightly as he adjusted position, probably responding to cramping or discomfort from sustained immobility. The movement was minimal, barely perceptible, but it created the exposure Tracy needed. Her crosshairs settled on center mass. Breathing paused. Trigger pressure applied with precision that transcended conscious thought. The shot surprised her even though she'd initiated it. Muscle memory executing fundamentals that had been ingrained through thousands of repetitions. Through thermal imaging, she watched Harper's signature lurch and collapse. Though whether she'd achieved a kill shot or merely wounded him remained unclear at this range through obscuring terrain. Viper 6 Shadow, she transmitted immediately. Enemy sniper threat neutralized, resuming Overwatch positions. But before Porter could respond, her world exploded in automatic weapons fire from multiple directions simultaneously. Harper hadn't been alone. He'd been the bait, drawing her into position where supporting elements could identify and eliminate her through coordinated fires that didn't, preventing catastrophic injury. Then new sounds joined the cacophony. The distinctive rotor wash of helicopters approaching fast and low, followed by the mechanical thunder of 30mm chain guns engaging targets with precision that marked Apache attack helicopters prosecuting enemy positions. All hostile forces. This is Warhawk 17. Cease fire and withdraw immediately or face destruction. This is your only warning. The incoming fire on Tracy's position diminished as enemy fighters recognized a new threat and redirected attention to the helicopters that represented far greater danger than a single sniper. She used a distraction to move aggressively, covering 50 m in seconds that would have been impossible under sustained observation. Her radio came alive with Porter's voice now carrying relief that professional discipline couldn't completely suppress. Warhawk 17 Viper 6. Outstanding timing. Enemy forces are withdrawing from our immediate perimeter. Request you prosecute targets of opportunity while maintaining awareness of friendly positions. Copy Viper 6. Engaging enemy forces on northern and eastern approaches. All friendly personnel remain in place to avoid blue-on-blue engagement. The Apache's 30mm guns create a distinctive sound, a mechanical roar that accompanied the impacts of high explosive rounds detonating among enemy positions. Tracy watched through her thermal scope as heat signatures scattered, seeking cover from aerial attack that offered no concealment and limited options for effective counterfire. But Garrison's forces weren't random insurgents without resources or training. Within 30 seconds of the Apache engagement, Tracy saw the distinctive launch signature of a surface-to-air missile, a bright thermal plume streaking upward from position east of the Marine perimeter. Warhawk 17. Warhawk 7 missile launch. She transmitted immediately on the frequency she'd been monitoring. Break right. Deploy countermeasures. The lead Apache pilot responded with the practice calm that marked aviators who trained for exactly this scenario. His aircraft banking hard while deploying flares designed to decoy heat-seeking missiles. The missile tracked toward the flare pattern, detonating harmlessly 200 meters from a helicopter in an explosion that briefly illuminated the canyon like artificial daylight. Warhawk 17 copies. We are taking effective SAM fire, engaging launch position with Hellfire missiles. The Apache's response was immediate and devastating. 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles streaked from the helicopter's weapons pylons, their rocket motors creating bright contrails in the darkness before impacting the position where the SAM launch had originated. Secondary explosions suggested the target had been an ammunition cache or vehicle, the fireball rising hundreds of feet into the night sky. But the damage had been done. Garrison's forces now knew the Apache helicopters were vulnerable to ground fire if engaged from prepared positions with appropriate weapons. The psychological advantage of aerial support had been challenged, forcing the helicopter crews to maintain standoff ranges that reduced their ability to provide close support for the trapped Marines. Tracy heard Porter's voice on the radio, speaking to the Apache flight lead with tactical assessment that acknowledged changing circumstances. Warhawk 17 Viper 6. Enemy possesses MANPAD's capability and willingness to engage. Recommend you maintain altitude and prosecute targets from standoff range. We can hold our position if you suppress enemy command and control elements. Roger. Viper 6. Shifting to standoff engagement. Be advised we have approximately 40 minutes of station time before requiring return to base for refuel. QRF ground convoy is still estimated 90 minutes from your position. The mathematics were brutally simple. 40 minutes of Apache support, then 50 minutes of vulnerability before ground reinforcements arrived. Porter's Marines would need to survive that gap with whatever ammunition remained and whatever support Tracy could provide from positions that had been compromised by Harper's trap. She found new cover 300M from where Harper's team had nearly killed her, this time selecting ground that offered multiple escape routes and concealment from observation by personnel operating at ground level. The thermal scope revealed Harper's heat signature still present in his original position, though his movement patterns suggested injury rather than death. She'd wounded him, degraded his capability, but hadn't eliminated the threat he represented. Her satellite phone buzzed with incoming call from Norman. She answered while maintaining observation of the tactical situation below. Tracy Brennan received intelligence update. Norman's voice carried urgency that immediately elevated her alertness. Garrison isn't just running arms deals. He's been coordinating with foreign intelligence services, selling classified information about American military operations. That Marine unit stumbled onto a meeting between Garrison and SVR handlers. Russian foreign intelligence. This is espionage territory now, which means Garrison can't afford to leave witnesses. The implications crystallized with terrible clarity. Garrison would fight until every Marine was dead, or he'd successfully withdrawn with his foreign intelligence contacts. There would be no negotiation, no surrender, no possibility of tactical withdrawal that left American personnel alive to testify about what they'd observed. Tell Brennan that Porter's unit needs immediate priority for all available support, Tracy said. Garrison's going to throw everything he has at that perimeter once the Apaches leave station. We're looking at potential massacre if QRF doesn't arrive before that support window closes. She knows she's personally leading the QRF convoy, pulling every asset she can to get there faster. Colonel Patricia Brennan was 48 years old, career Marine officer who commanded everything from rifle platoon to battalion operations. She'd taken command of Forward Operating Base Rampart 3 months ago, inheriting a tactical situation that involved navigating political complications while maintaining operational effectiveness in a region where American presence existed in the gray space between combat. Operations and peacekeeping missions. Now she sat in the lead vehicle of a convoy racing through darkness toward Wadi al-Shams, monitoring radio traffic that painted a desperate picture of Marines fighting for survival against odds that professional assessment suggested they shouldn't survive. Her operations officer, Major Scott Davidson, rode beside her, reviewing tactical displays that updated with information from the Apache helicopters orbiting the engagement area. "Ma'am, Apache flight reports enemy forces are consolidating for renewed assault." Davidson said they're counting approximately 45 heat signatures remaining in fighting positions around the Marine perimeter. Estimated 15 casualties from helicopter engagement, but the majority of enemy forces remain combat effective. Brennan studied the tactical display, seeing the geometry of siege warfare, where numerical superiority would eventually overcome defensive advantages through sustained pressure. Porter's Marines were running out of time, ammunition, and options. "How far out are we?" she asked the convoy commander. 75 minutes at current speed, ma'am. Terrain limits how fast we can move without risking vehicle damage or ambush. 75 minutes. The Apaches will be gone in 40. That left 35 minutes where Porter's unit would be completely isolated against an enemy that had demonstrated both capability and willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of total elimination of American forces. "Increase speed," Brennan ordered. "Accept the risks." Those Marines don't have 75 minutes. Back on the RGL line, Tracy had repositioned again, this time selecting ground that provided overview of the entire tactical situation rather than focusing on specific target engagement. Her ammunition count had dropped to 38 rounds, sufficient for selective engagement, but inadequate for sustained fire support if Garrison committed his remaining forces to simultaneous assault from multiple directions. She keyed her radio to Porter's frequency, speaking with professional comm that leaders learn project regardless of internal assessment. Viper 6 Shadow Apache support will terminate in approximately 35 minutes. You'll have a window of vulnerability before QRF arrives. Recommend you consolidate defensive positions, redistribute remaining ammunition, and prepare for final assault by enemy forces who know this is their last chance to achieve mission objectives before American reinforcements overwhelm their numerical advantage. Porter's response came after a pause that suggested he'd been processing the same tactical calculus. "Copy, Shadow. We're consolidating now. What's your ammunition status?" "Sufficient for selective engagement on priority targets. I cannot provide sustained fire support across your entire perimeter." "Understood. We'll hold with what we have." The radio went silent, leaving Tracy alone with wind, darkness, and the weight of 28 lives that depended on her making shots that matter more than technical perfection or personal survival. Somewhere below, Vincent Garrison was preparing his final assault. And somewhere in the darkness, Logan Harper was still alive, wounded, but probably still combat effective, hunting her with the same skills and training that had once marked them both as elite warriors serving the same flag. The night was far from over, and the killing had barely begun. The Apache helicopters maintained their orbital pattern above Wadi al-Shams, their 30mm chain guns, periodically engaging targets that exposed themselves long enough to warrant ammunition expenditure. But the engagement had shifted from active combat to a waiting game where both sides understood that time favored whoever could sustain their position until reinforcements altered the tactical balance. Garrison's forces had withdrawn to cover positions, accepting temporary stalemate rather than exposing themselves to aerial attack. Porter's Marines used a res pit to redistribute ammunition and strengthen defensive preparations for the assault that would inevitably come once the helicopters departed. Tracy watched this tactical pause through her scope, recognizing professional discipline that marked forces willing to accept patience over aggression when circumstances favored defensive positioning. She fought against similar opponents during her deployments before Garrison destroyed her career. Professional soldiers who understood that winning meant surviving while your enemy exhausted themselves through premature commitment. Her radio crackled with the Apache flight, lead's voice, addressing Porter with information that confirmed everyone's tactical assessment. Viper 6 Warhawk 17. We are Winchester on Hellfire missiles and down to 20% ammunition for main gun. We can maintain station for another 25 minutes, but our ability to provide effective fire support is severely degraded. Recommend you prepare for our departure and execute whatever defensive preparations remain available. Porter acknowledged the verbal economy that marked leaders conserving mental energy for decisions that would determine survival or death. Tracy heard him coordinating with his platoon commanders, redistributing the remaining ammunition that now measured in double-digit magazines rather than the combat loads they'd carried into the canyon 6 hours ago. 25 minutes until the Marines would be alone again. 70 minutes until QRF arrived. 45 minutes of vulnerability where Garrison could commit everything he had without fear of aerial interdiction. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and inescapable. Movement below caught Tracy's attention. Heat signatures approaching Marine perimeter with the cautious deliberation of reconnaissance elements, probing for weaknesses before main assault forces committed. She counted 6 personnel moving in pairs, maintaining tactical spacing while using terrain features that provided concealment from ground-level observation. Professional tactics that suggested these weren't random fighters, but specialized personnel conducting detailed reconnaissance that would inform Garrison's assault planning. She tracked the nearest pair through her scope, calculating range and target priority. Eliminating reconnaissance elements would degrade Garrison's intelligence about Marine defensive capabilities, potentially forcing him to assault with incomplete information that created opportunities for defensive success. But engaging these targets would also reveal her position to forces that had been searching for her since Harper's failed ambush. The decision required balancing tactical advantage against personal risk, weighing the value of 2 enemy casualties against the probability of effective counterfire from forces that now understood her. Approximate operating area. Tracy made the calculation that combat veterans learn through experience, measuring acceptable risk against mission requirements. Her first shot eliminated the lead reconnaissance element at 340 m. The suppressed crack of her rifle muted by distance and terrain features that scattered sound across the canyon. The second fighter in that pair immediately sought cover, but Tracy had already adjusted her aim point, her second round catching him as he dove behind inadequate concealment. The remaining 4 reconnaissance personnel scattered, their disciplined movement patterns, abandoning stealth for speed as they withdrew toward positions where supporting fires could suppress the sniper who just demonstrated continued capability despite hours of sustained engagement. Viper 6 Shadow Tracy transmitted while relocating to avoid the counter-fire she knew was coming. Enemy reconnaissance eliminated on your eastern approach. Expect main assault to develop from northern and western vectors, where they maintain better intelligence about your defensive positioning. Shadow, what's your status? Porter asked, his concern evident despite professional tone. We heard sustained fire on your position earlier. Are you still combat effective? Affirmative. Wounded one of their counter-snipers, but he's still operational. I'm maintaining mobility to avoid giving them clean targeting solutions. What she didn't mention was the exhaustion that came from 6 hours of sustained operations at altitude, the way her hands trembled slightly from adrenaline depletion and caloric deficit, or the psychological weight of knowing that Harper was still hunting her somewhere in the darkness. Professional warriors learn to function through conditions that would incapacitate untrained personnel, but that capability didn't eliminate the physical and mental costs that accumulated with each passing hour. Lance Corporal Chase Dixon's radio suddenly crackled with transmission on a frequency that had been silent since the engagement began. The standard tactical channel that Garrison's jamming had rendered useless for the past 6 hours. All American forces in Wadi al-Shams. This is Colonel Vincent Garrison. I'm offering a one-time opportunity for negotiated withdrawal. You have stumbled into an operation that involves parties and interests beyond your understanding. I'm prepared to allow your unit to withdraw with wounded and equipment if you agree to classify this engagement as training accident and make no mention of personnel or activities you've observed in this area. Porter looked at Lieutenant Holly Duncan, who'd moved to his position when the transmission began. Both officers recognized the offer for what it represented. Garrison attempting to avoid the tactical complications that would come from eliminating an entire Marine unit when QRF was already inbound and would arrive with overwhelming force that his mercenaries couldn't resist. "Sir, it's a trap," Duncan said quietly. "The moment we break cover to withdraw, they'll engage from prepared positions. We'll take more casualties during withdrawal than we would holding this perimeter." Porter nodded, his own tactical assessment reaching identical conclusions. But he also recognized that Garrison's offer created an opportunity to extract information through dialogue while the temporary ceasefire held. He keyed his radio, speaking with a professional courtesy that officers learn to maintain even with enemies who deserve nothing but contempt. "Colonel Garrison, this is Captain Zachary Porter, United States Marine Corps. I'm afraid I can't accept your offer. My orders don't include negotiating with forces engaged in illegal activities on foreign soil. And I certainly won't agree to falsify reports about combat operations that have resulted in American casualties." There was a pause before Garrison responded, his voice carrying dark amusement mixed with frustration. "Captain Porter, I respect your dedication to duty, but you're sacrificing your Marines for principles that your own institution abandoned years ago. The same Marine Corps that will court-martial you for losing this unit is perfectly willing to overlook operational realities when political expediency demands convenient fictions." "Perhaps," Porter replied, "but I took an oath that didn't include exceptions for convenient situations or political complications. My Marines will hold this position until relieved or eliminated. Those are the only two outcomes I'm interested in discussing." Tracy listened to this exchange while maintaining observation of enemy positions that were using the ceasefire to improve their tactical disposition. She recognized Garrison's voice after 4 years heard the same cold calculation that had marked him during the original betrayal that destroyed her career. He was probing for weakness, testing whether Porter could be manipulated through pressure or intimidated through threats. She keyed her own radio, speaking on the frequency Garrison had used for his transmission. "Hello, Vincent. It's been a while since you've heard my voice. For years, give or take. How's the mercenary business treating you? Better than selling out Marines to cover your arms dealing, I hope." The silence that followed her transmission carried weight that transcended tactical communication. Tracy could imagine Garrison processing the information that the sniper who'd been systematically dismantling his ambush was the same Marine he'd framed for murder to eliminate a witness to his crimes. When Garrison finally responded, his voice had shifted from professional courtesy to personal venom. "Tracy Sinclair, I should have known you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in. Tell me, does Captain Porter know he's receiving fire support from a convicted murderer? Does he understand that the person claiming to protect his Marines is the same disgraced operator who killed 3 of her own people through catastrophic judgment failure?" Porter's voice cut through before Tracy could respond. "Colonel Garrison, Shadow's performance over the past 6 hours speaks for itself. Whatever history exists between you is irrelevant to current tactical situation. I suggest you withdraw your forces while you still can. Quick reaction forces inbound with overwhelming capability that will eliminate your operational freedom." But Garrison wasn't finished. His next transmission targeted Tracy. Specifically, ignoring Porter's attempt to redirect the conversation. "Sinclair, you want to know what really happened 4 years ago? Your targeting package was legitimate. That CIA asset you killed was actually a double agent feeding information to terrorist networks. I didn't frame you. I protected you from a court-martial that would have revealed classified operations and gotten you executed for treason. You spent 4 years playing victim when you should have been thanking me for the mercy of a simple, dishonorable discharge." Tracy felt cold rage settle into her chest, the kind of anger that transcended hot emotion and became calculating focus. Garrison was lying, attempting psychological manipulation through revisionist history that painted her conviction as mercy rather than betrayal. "That's an interesting story, Vincent," she replied, her voice carrying icy calm, "but I've had 4 years to investigate what really happened. I know about the arms deals you were running through that CIA asset. I know about the money transfers to offshore accounts. I know about the 2 Marines you killed because they discovered your operation. And I know you framed me because I was convenient scapegoat for crimes you committed while wearing the uniform. Norman's voice suddenly came through on her satellite phone, speaking urgently despite the risk of compromising her concealment through audible conversation. Tracy Brennan's intelligence officer just cracked Garrison's encrypted communications archive. Everything you just said is confirmed in his own operational logs. She's forwarding evidence to Judge Advocate General right now. You were right about all of it. The arms deals, the murders, the frame-up. This is going to blow the lid off corruption that reaches all the way to Defense Department contracting oversight. Tracy absorbed this information while maintaining her tactical focus, understanding that vindication, after 4 years, didn't change the immediate situation where 28 Marines needed her to keep them alive rather than celebrate personal victories. Tell Brennan to keep that evidence secure, she replied quietly. Garrison knows his operation is compromised now. He's going to try eliminating everyone who can testify, which means Porter's Marines and me. This just became about survival, rather than tactical objectives. She switched back to the tactical frequency, where Garrison's voice was still attempting to manipulate Porter through psychological pressure. Captain, your sniper is a liability rather than asset. Tracy Sinclair killed 3 Marines through reckless disregard for proper verification procedures. Now she's operating without authorization, without command oversight, and without concern for collateral damage. How many of your Marines are you willing to sacrifice to protect someone who shouldn't be trusted with a rifle, let alone combat operations? Sergeant First Class Earl Bishop's voice cut through before Porter could respond. The senior NCO speaking with the blunt authority that marked veterans who'd earned the right to tell officers what they needed to hear rather than what they wanted to hear. With all due respect to whatever rank you use to hold, Colonel Shadow has kept us alive for 6 hours against odds that should have wiped us out in the first 30 minutes. I don't give a damn what her service record says or what court-martial convicted her of. She's proven her worth through actions tonight, which is more than I can say for whoever provided the intelligence that sent us into this ambush. Other voices joined Bishop's assessment. Marines who'd watched Shadow's precision fire eliminate threats that would have killed them, who'd heard her calm tactical guidance during moments when leadership would have broken lesser operators. Whatever Garrison claimed about her past, the Marines fighting in Wadial shams had formed their own conclusions based on evidence that mattered more than official narratives. Tracy felt her throat tighten with emotion that 4 years of isolation hadn't prepared her to handle. These Marines didn't know her, had no reason to trust someone carrying the disgrace of dishonorable discharge. Yet, they judged her based on actions rather than reputation. The vindication carried weight that transcended any official exoneration that might come from Brennan's evidence. All units, this is Warhawk 17. The Apache flight lead's voice interrupted the dialogue with tactical necessity. We are reaching minimum fuel status and must return to base. Viper 6, you're on your own until QRF arrives. Good luck, Marines. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors faded as the Apaches banked away from the canyon, their departure creating sudden silence that felt ominous after hours of their reassuring presence overhead. Porter's Marines understood what this meant. 45 minutes of vulnerability where Garrison's forces could assault without fear of aerial interdiction. Tracy heard movement in the darkness to her east. The subtle sounds that marked professional infantry advancing through the rain. They'd reconnoitered during the ceasefire. Garrison was committing his forces, now using the Apache departure as trigger for assault that would either eliminate the Marines or get wiped out when QRF arrived with overwhelming force. Viper 6 Shadow, she transmitted while adjusting her position to observe multiple approach vectors simultaneously. Enemy forces advancing on your northern and western perimeters. Estimate 30-plus personnel in coordinated assault formation. I'll engage priority targets, but you need to prepare for close combat. All Viper elements. Weapons tight until they're inside 100 m, Porter commanded, his voice carrying controlled intensity that marked leaders managing fear through professional discipline. Conserve ammunition for point-blank defense. Designated marksmen. Engage leadership targets as they present. Machine guns hold fire until assault reaches 50 m. Then sustain suppression on prime with interlocking fires that would catch assault forces in crossfire if they committed to that vector. His remaining ammunition measured 180 rounds, less than 2 minutes of sustained fire, requiring perfect fire discipline and target prioritization to make every burst count. Beside him, Lance Corporal Derek Stone prepared to feed ammunition belts with a mechanical precision that sustained crew-served weapons during combat operations. At 24, Derek had never imagined his first real firefight would involve defending against overwhelming odds with insufficient ammunition and wounded teammates who needed evacuation he couldn't provide. "You ready for this?" Danny asked, his voice steady despite circumstances that warranted fear. "No," Derek replied honestly, "but I don't think anyone's ever actually ready for this kind of thing. We just do it anyway because that's the job." Danny nodded, respecting the honesty that marked young Marines coming to terms with mortality in situations where training mentality, and neither proved adequate to eliminate fear or guarantee survival. Private First Class Tyler Grant checked his rifle's chamber for the 4th time in 2 minutes. The nervous energy that marked inexperienced warriors manifesting through repetitive equipment verification. He'd fired his rifle in combat for the first time today. Watch a human being fall, because he'd pulled the trigger and processed the psychological weight that came from ending another person's existence through deliberate violence. Corporal Jake Hutchkins, Tyler's team leader, crawled to his position during the final moments before contact. "Grant, you've done good work today," Jake said quietly. "When this assault starts, remember your fundamentals and trust your training. You are not alone out here. You've got experienced Marines on both sides who will guide you through." Tyler nodded, drawing confidence from Jake's presence and the matter-of-fact professionalism that marked NCOs who understood that leadership during combat meant projecting calm regardless of internal assessment. Tracy's scope tracked the advancing assault forces, identifying targets through thermal imaging that revealed heat signatures, moving with tactical discipline through terrain that should have provided concealment. She counted 32 personnel advancing in stagger formation, maintaining intervals that prevented single weapons from engaging multiple targets simultaneously. Her first shot eliminated a figure moving ahead of the main formation. Probable squad leader conducting final reconnaissance before the assault committed fully. Range 240 m through air that had cooled significantly since sunset, requiring different compensation than her previous engagements calculated during daylight conditions. The advancing forces immediately went aground, seeking cover while attempting to identify her position through muzzle flash that distance and terrain had scattered across multiple possible locations. But their pause cost momentum, forcing garrison to choose between maintaining assault coordination or accepting that individual units would engage piecemeal as they reached the Marine perimeter. Shadow Viper 6. Outstanding shot. Enemy assault is hesitating. Recommend continued harassment of leadership targets while they're reorganizing. But before Tracy could respond, incoming fire erupted from a position she hadn't identified. Logan Harper's voice coming through her radio, even as bullets impacted around her location. "Told you I was still in the fight. Sinclair, you sure are pretty good for someone carrying around 4 years of guilt and self-doubt. But you made the amateur mistake, engaging for position without clear escape route. Now you're pinned while my people work around your flanks." Tracy assessed her tactical situation with the cold calculation that marked professionals evaluating bad options for least catastrophic choice. Harper was correct. She prioritized optimal firing position over mobility, and now enemy forces were maneuvering to eliminate her while she lacked good options for withdrawal. "Shadow Viper 6, what's your status?" Porter's voice carried concern that transcended tactical interest. Pinned down by counter-sniper, she replied, while low-crawling toward marginally better cover. "I'm combat effective, but mobility is compromised. Execute your defensive plan without depending on my support." She couldn't see Porter's expression, but imagine his reaction to information that the sniper who kept him alive for 6 hours was now fighting for her own survival, without ability to provide continued overwatch. The tactical equation had shifted decisively in Garrison's favor. Marines running low on ammunition, no air support, and their only external assistance now eliminated as a factor. Lieutenant Brad Keir heard Shadow's transmission and made a decision that would either save lives or get more Marines killed. He keyed his radio to 2nd Platoon's frequency, addressing Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb with orders that deviated from Porter's defensive guidance. "Webb, take your squad and move to support Shadow's position. She's pinned down approximately 400 m north of our perimeter. Move fast. Use the assault as cover for your movement, and bring her back if possible." Webb processed this order with a calculating awareness that marked experienced NCOs as evaluating whether lieutenant's decisions reflected sound tactical judgment or dangerous impulse. Moving a squad outside the defensive perimeter weakened their position and exposed those Marines to engagement from multiple directions. But abandoning Shadow meant losing the only external support that had any chance of helping them survive until QRF arrived. "Moving now, sir," Webb replied, gathering his 7 Marines with hand signals that communicated urgency without requiring verbal coordination that could be overheard by enemy forces. Corporal Lisa Patterson, the combat medic assigned to 2nd Platoon, grabbed her aid kit and moved with Webb's squad, despite knowing that her medical training would be useless if they got caught in ambush during their movement toward Shadow's position. But Marines didn't leave people behind, regardless of official status or command authorization. Tracy saw the heat signatures moving toward her position through terrain that offered minimal. Concealment from enemy observation. 8 Marines advancing with tactical discipline toward a fight they didn't need to participate in, risking their lives for someone who wasn't officially part of their unit, and carried the disgrace of dishonorable discharge. Viper element moving toward my position. "Turn back," she transmitted urgently. "You're exposing yourselves to engagement from multiple directions. I can extract independently." Webb's response carried the stubborn determination that marked senior NCOs who'd made decisions and wouldn't be argued out of them. "Negative, Shadow. We already committed. Prepare to displace on our arrival." Harper's voice cut through the radio traffic with dark amusement. How touching. Marines coming to rescue the disgraced sniper who murdered 3 of her own people. "Garrison, you watching this? We've got American forces splitting their defensive position to save someone who should be in prison." Garrison's response came immediately. "All units. Priority target is a relief force moving north from Marine perimeter. Eliminate them and we eliminate both their external support and their internal cohesion. Prosecute with extreme prejudice." Tracy watched in horror as multiple enemy positions shifted orientation toward Webb's advancing squad, preparing crossfire that would catch the Marines in a kill zone with inadequate cover and insufficient firepower to fight through. She'd spent 6 hours keeping Porter's unit alive, and now her own situation was about to get 8 more Marines killed in a rescue attempt that tactical logic said should never have been authorized. She made a decision that transcended personal survival or tactical optimization. Rolling from her cover, she exposed herself to Harper's fire while sprinting toward a position that would draw enemy attention away from Webb's squad. Bullets cracked past her head, impacted at her feet, but she continued moving with a desperate speed that marked warriors choosing probable death over certain death of others. Her rifle came up even as she ran, firing from positions that would have earned failing grades of marksmanship qualification, but succeeded in drawing enemy fire toward her location and away from Marines advancing to her rescue. Not precision shooting, but psychological warfare, making herself a priority target through aggressive action that professional fighters couldn't ignore. Harper's voice carried frustrated admiration. "Damn it, Sinclair. You're either the bravest Marine I've ever seen, or the most suicidal. Either way, you're about to be the deadest." But Webb's squad had used Tracy's distraction to close distance, their rifles now engaging the enemy positions that had been preparing to ambush them. The tactical situation devolved into close-range chaos, where preparation mattered less than aggression, and the willingness to advance despite incoming fire that killed or wounded with indiscriminate efficiency. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb led from the front, his rifle engaging targets with the practiced efficiency that came from 3 previous deployments and countless hours of training. At 36, he'd survived situations that killed younger Marines through combination of skill, experience, and the kind of luck that you couldn't train for, but needed desperately when violence became geometry and ballistics. Covering fire left flank, Webb shouted, directing his Marines while simultaneously engaging multiple targets that were attempting to maneuver around their position. Patterson, stay with the casualty. Richardson, shift right and watch R6. Lance Corporal Brian Foster had taken a round through his calf muscle during their advance. The injury painful, but not immediately life-threatening. If they could extract him before blood loss and shock complicated the wound beyond field treatment capabilities. Lisa Patterson worked on him while bullets impacted around their position. Her hands steady despite circumstances that justified panic. Tracy reached Webb's position through movement that combined tactical discipline with desperate improvisation, diving into cover behind a rock formation that barely qualified as concealment, let alone protection from sustained fire. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded between ragged breaths, adrenaline, and exhaustion, creating a combination that made speaking difficult. "Saving your ass," Webb replied with a dark humor that marked combat veterans processing fear through inappropriate jokes. Sir said, "We don't leave people behind. Even disgraced snipers who should probably know better than to get pinned down by counter-snipers. I had an escape plan," Tracy said, which was mostly true if you counter-run really fast and hope they miss as legitimate tactical planning. "Sure you did," Webb said, grinning, despite incoming fire that suggested their current position would become untenable within minutes. "Now, let's execute the part where we all get back to the perimeter alive, because I'm too old for dying in desert canyons." But the return movement would expose them to the same fire they just survived during their advance, complicated now by Brian Foster's injury that required 2 Marines to carry him. The mathematics were brutally simple. Move fast and leave the wounded, or move carefully and get caught in crossfire that would kill everyone. Tracy made calculations that combat veterans learned through experience measuring acceptable risk against mission requirements. "Webb, take your squad back to the perimeter. I'll provide covering fire from here and extract independently once you're clear." Webb looked at her with a calculating assessment that marked senior NCOs as evaluating whether subordinates' decisions reflected sound judgment or suicidal impulse. "Negative. We came for you. We're leaving with you. That's how Marines operate. In case you forgot, during your 4 years away from the Corps." "I'm not in the Corps anymore," Tracy replied, her voice carrying the weight of 4 years accepting that reality. "Maybe not officially," Webb said, "but you've been acting like a Marine all night. Now stop arguing and help us get Brian back to where Doc Marshall can treat him properly." The assault on Porter's main perimeter had intensified during Webb's rescue operation. Enemy forces recognizing that the Marines had weakened their defensive position and committing to coordinated attack that pushed into close-range combat where numerical superiority would determine outcomes. Corporal Danny Ortega's machine gun hammered at the advancing forces. His sustained fire-consuming ammunition remained. Sergeant First Class Earl Bishop moved between positions, encouraging Marines who were exhausted and terrified, but continued fighting because that's what professionals did regardless of outcome. At 39, Bishop had survived enough combat to understand that leadership during desperate situations meant projecting confidence you didn't necessarily feel while making tactical decisions that might get people killed, but represented the least bad options available. "Hutchkins, shift your fire left. Grant, watch your ammunition expenditure. Ortega, short bursts or you'll burn through everything before they're inside pistol range." Captain Zachary Porter maintained tactical overview despite circumstances that would have overwhelmed less experienced officers, coordinating defensive fires between platoon while monitoring radio traffic that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Lieutenant Holly Duncan had been wounded by shrapnel during the assault, her left arm hanging useless, but still directing her Marines with voice commands and leading by example that transcended physical injury. "Sir, we're down to maybe 5 minutes of coordinated defensive fire," Duncan reported, her voice tight with pain, but professional despite circumstances. "After that, it becomes hand-to-hand with pistols and whatever improvised weapons we can employ." Porter nodded, his tactical assessment reaching identical conclusions. They'd fought well, inflicted significant casualties on numerically superior forces, but mathematics would eventually determine outcomes that courage couldn't overcome. "All Viper elements, prepare for final defensive stand," he commanded, his voice carrying across the tactical network. "If we don't make it, Make sure every shot counts and every Marine dies fighting rather than surrendering. That's not how this unit ends. Tracy heard this transmission while Webb's squad fought their way back toward the perimeter. Brian Foster carried between two Marines whose movement was slowed by his weight and their own exhaustion. She provided covering fire with her remaining ammunition, down to 31 rounds now, each one precious beyond normal calculation because they represented the difference between Marines living or dying in the next few minutes. Her satellite phone buzzed with a call from Norman, his voice carrying urgency that transcended their usual communication patterns. Tracy, QRF is 10 minutes out. Brennan's convoy has pushed past safe speed limits, and they're approaching the canyon entrance. Can Porter's unit hold another 10 minutes? Tracy assessed the tactical situation with honest evaluation that stripped away hope or optimism in favor of brutal mathematics. Porter's Marines were nearly out of ammunition, surrounded on three sides, fighting against forces that could accept casualties and continue attacking through determination and numerical advantage. 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours given their current circumstances. Negative, she replied quietly. They've got maybe 5 minutes before their defensive capability collapses completely. Tell Brennan to come fast and bring everything she has. She disconnected and made a decision that would either save 28 Marines or get herself killed in process. Probably both given the tactical situation and the number of enemy forces between her position and Garrison's command element that was coordinating the assault from the old mine complex. Webb, continue your movement to the perimeter, she directed while gathering her rifle and remaining ammunition. I'm moving to engage enemy command and control. If I can disrupt their coordination, Porter might survive long enough for QRF to arrive. Webb grabbed her arm, his grip firm despite the chaos surrounding them. That's suicide, Shadow. You'll never reach enemy command positions through the forces between here and there. Probably not, Tracy agreed. But it's better odds than waiting for them to overrun Porter's position while I sit here conserving ammunition. I'll never need because we'll all be dead. She pulled free from Webb's grip and started moving before he could argue further, advancing through terrain that offered minimal concealment toward the mine complex where Garrison was directing operations. Her movement combined tactical discipline with desperate speed, using enemy focus on the Marine perimeter to mask her infiltration toward their command element. Logan Harper's voice crackled through her radio as she moved. Garrison Sinclair is moving toward your position. I'm tracking her thermal signature. Permission to engage. There was a pause before Garrison responded, his voice carrying calculation that marked someone making strategic decisions that transcended immediate tactical considerations. Negative, Harper, let her come. I want to settle this personally. For years ago, she should have died with the other 3 Marines who discovered my operation. Tonight, I finished what I started. Tracy heard this exchange while advancing, understanding that Garrison was deliberately allowing her approach because he wanted the satisfaction of eliminating her directly rather than through subordinates. His arrogance created the only tactical advantage he possessed, the certainty that he would expose himself to engage her when she reached his position. The mine complex loomed ahead through the darkness, its abandoned buildings and equipment yards now serving as command posts for mercenary operations that had nearly eliminated an entire Marine company. She counted 5 heat signatures moving around the main structure. Garrison security element. Professional fighters maintaining perimeter security, while their commander directed operations from protected positions inside. Range to near sentry, 280 m. Close enough that suppressed shots would still be audible, alerting the entire security element to her presence before she could. Eliminate enough targets to make entry feasible, but she lacked time for methodical approach. And the sound of intensifying combat from Porter's perimeter suggested that the Marines were reaching the breaking point where defensive positions would collapse through ammunition depletion and casualty accumulation. She made calculations that balanced probability of success against certainty of failure if she delayed. Then she started shooting. Her first round eliminated the nearest sentry at 280 m. The suppressed crack barely audible over the ambient noise of combat echoing through the canyon. The remaining 4 security personnel reacted with professional speed, seeking cover while attempting to identify threat direction through observation that darkness and distance made difficult. Tracy shifted aim to the second target before the first had finished falling, her breathing cycle reaching its control pause. The rifle fired, another heat signature dropping as her bullet found its mark with precision that 4 years of isolation hadn't diminished. 3 sentries remaining, now fully alert and beginning coordinated response to contact from unknown direction. She relocated 30M before taking her third shot, using mobility to confuse enemy assessment of her position while maintaining aggressive engagement that kept them reactive rather than coordinated. The third sentry fell, his rifle clattering against stone as he collapsed. 2 remaining, both now prone behind cover that provided protection from her current angle. Movement to her left registered through peripheral vision. Additional enemy forces responding to contact at their command post. Probably squad-sized element moving to reinforce security that was being systematically eliminated by invisible threat. She estimated 45 seconds before they reached positions where they could effectively engage her, requiring decision between continuing her assault on the command post or withdrawing to avoid being caught in crossfire. The sound of gunfire from Porter's perimeter intensified, suggesting final assault was reaching critical point where Marine defensive capability would either hold or collapse completely. No time for tactical perfection or risk mitigation. Time only for desperate action that might create the disruption necessary for 28 Americans to survive another 5 minutes. Tracy rose from cover and sprinted toward the mine complex main building, her rifle firing as she ran, engaging targets through movement that would have earned failing grades and marksmanship qualification, but succeeded in suppressing enemy response through sheer aggressive audacity. Not precision shooting, but psychological warfare, making herself such immediate threat that enemy forces prioritize her elimination over coordinating their assault on the Marine perimeter. She crashed through the main building's door, her momentum carrying her into interior space that thermal imaging couldn't penetrate effectively. Weapon light activated, her rifle's mounted illumination cutting through darkness to reveal Garrison standing behind tactical display that showed the battle unfolding in real time. Vincent Garrison at 52 still carried himself with the command presence that had once made him respected officer in the Marine Corps. His weathered face showed the years he'd spent operating in theaters where American forces fought and died for objectives that shifted with political winds and strategic calculations that warriors on the ground never fully understood. Now he stood behind a mercenary operation that had nearly eliminated 28 Marines who'd had the bad luck to stumble onto activities they weren't supposed to witness. "Hello, Tracy," Garrison said with calm that suggested he'd been expecting this confrontation. "For years, and you're still carrying that rifle like it's the only thing in the world that matters. Some habits never change, do they?" Tracy's weapon remained trained on his center mass, her finger resting on the trigger with pressure that will require only slight increase to fire. "Tell your forces to cease assault on the Marine perimeter, or I could pull this trigger, and you don't get to see how this ends." Garrison smiled, the expression carrying dark amusement that marked someone who planned for exactly the scenario. "If you shoot me, my people have standing orders to eliminate every Marine in that perimeter. No prisoners, no mercy, total annihilation. But if you lower your weapon and we negotiate, I'm prepared to allow their extraction in exchange for your silence about what you've observed here tonight." "You mean your espionage operation?" Tracy replied. "The one where you've been selling classified information to Russian intelligence services. Brennan's people cracked your communications archive. We know everything. The arms deals, the intelligence transfers, the money you collected from foreign handlers. This isn't just about covering up criminal activity anymore. This is treason." Garrison's expression shifted, calculation replacing amusement as he processed information that his operational security had been compromised at levels that eliminated plausible deniability. "Then you understand why none of you can be allowed to survive," he said quietly. "My handlers in Moscow don't accept failure, and they certainly don't tolerate exposure. Those Marines died tonight, you die tonight, and this operation gets buried under layers of classification that will take decades to unravel." "Except QRF is 5 minutes out," Tracy countered. "You can't eliminate the Marines, extract your people, and escape before American reinforcements arrive with overwhelming force. Your only play is negotiating surrender while you still have bargaining power." But even as she spoke, Tracy recognized a cold certainty in Garrison's eyes that marked someone who'd already accepted that this operation would be his last. He wasn't planning extraction or negotiation. He was planning to take as constraints that get warriors killed while politicians collect accolades. Tracy's finger tightened on the trigger, pressure increasing toward the point where mechanical action would overcome spring tension and the rifle would fire. But she hesitated, knowing the killing Garrison wouldn't stop his forces from executing their orders to eliminate the Marine perimeter. Her personal revenge mattered less than keeping 28 Americans alive for another 5 minutes. The sounds of approaching vehicles suddenly echoed through the canyon, diesel engines running hard, the mechanical thunder of strikers and raps moving at speeds that would have been reckless, except that Marines were dying and conventional caution couldn't be afforded. QRF had arrived early, Brennan pushing her convoy past safety margins in response to intelligence that suggested every second mattered. Garrison heard this, too, his expression showing recognition that his tactical window had closed, and his only remaining options involved choices between bad outcomes and worse ones. "Looks like your friend arrived just in time," he said, reaching slowly for the radio on his tactical vest. "I'll order my forces to cease fire and withdraw. You win this round. Sinclair." But Tracy recognized a movement pattern that marked someone reaching for weapon rather than communication device. Her training screaming warnings that transcended conscious analysis. She dove left as Garrison's hand cleared his vest with pistol rather than radio. His first shot impacting where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. Her rifle fired twice. Controlled pair through fundamentals that had been ingrained through thousands of training repetitions. Both rounds caught Garrison's center mass, his body armor stopping penetration, but transferring hydrostatic shock that dropped him to his knees. His pistol fell from nerveless fingers, clattering across the floor beyond his reach. Tracy moved forward, kicking the weapon away while maintaining her rifle trained on him. Garrison looked up at her with expression that mixed pain with something approaching respect. "Outstanding shooting," he said, blood beginning to seep through his vest where the armor had cracked under impact. "You always were the best student I trained. Shame you couldn't see beyond the idealism that makes good Marines but poor survivors." "Marines are supposed to be more than survivors," Tracy replied. "We're supposed to stand for something beyond self-interest and profit." "That's what you forgot, Vincent. That's why you're bleeding on this floor, instead of commanding Marines who actually deserve your leadership." Colonel Patricia Brennan's voice crackled through the radio frequency that had been silenced since the engagement began. "All hostile forces. This is Colonel Brennan, United States Marine Corps. You are surrounded by superior forces with authorization to employ lethal violence. Lay down your weapons immediately and surrender or face destruction. This is your only warning." The distinctive sounds of combat from Porter's perimeter diminished as Garrison's mercenaries recognized that their tactical situation had become untenable. Tracy heard the sounds of weapons being placed on ground, the verbal challenges and responses that marked enemy forces surrendering to QRF elements that had arrived with overwhelming capability that couldn't be resisted. She keyed her radio to Porter's frequency while maintaining her weapon trained on Garrison. "Viper 6 Shadow. Enemy commander is in custody. Hostile forces are surrendering to QRF. You're clear." Porter's response carried exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue. The emotional weight that comes from surviving situations where survival seemed impossible and cost more than anyone should have been required to pay. "Shadow, we thank you doesn't seem adequate. You saved our lives tonight. All of us." Marines from the QRF secured the mine complex, their weapons clearing rooms with tactical efficiency that marked forces trained for exactly this kind of operation. Tracy lowered her rifle as Colonel Brennan entered the command center, her expression showing mixture of relief and professional assessment. "Corporal Sinclair," Brennan said formally, "Vincent Garrison is in custody. Your actions tonight have saved 28 American lives and exposed espionage operations that reach into the highest levels of Defense Department contracting. On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I want to thank you for your service and dedication despite institutional failures that should never have occurred. Tracy looked at Garrison slumped against the wall with his body armor cracked and blood seeping through fabric. For years of anger and betrayal focused on this moment. The man who destroyed her career, finally held accountable for crimes that cost Marines their lives and careers their integrity. But she felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion, and the awareness that justice wouldn't restore what had been taken. The 4 years of isolation, the reputation destroyed by lies, the career that had defined her identity, before institutional betrayal stripped it away. Permission to check on Porter's casualties, ma'am, Tracy requested, her voice carrying professional tone that never quite disappeared regardless of discharge status. Brennan nodded, recognizing that warriors needed to see the people they'd fought to protect, rather than collecting official gratitude from officers who understood procedures better than the psychological requirements of combat veterans processing violence through human connection. Tracy moved through the canyon toward Porter's perimeter, passing Marines from QRF, who stared at her with expressions mixing curiosity and respect. She found the Marine position where Reed Marshall was still working on Paige Foster, the young private who'd been critical since taking shrapnel during the initial ambush. "How is she?" Tracy asked quietly. Reed looked up, his face showing exhaustion that came from hours of treating casualties with inadequate supplies. "She's alive, which is better than she should be, but she needs surgical intervention immediately. We've got medevac helicopters inbound, estimated 5 minutes." Tracy knelt beside Paige, seeing the pale face of a 22-year-old Marine who'd proven herself capable despite institutional questions about women serving in combat roles. The young woman's eyes flickered open, focusing on Tracy with drug-hazed awareness. "Are we?" Paige's voice was barely audible. "Are we okay?" "You're okay," Tracy replied, gripping her hand with contact that conveyed reassurance beyond words. "You fought well, Marine. Your team is safe because you held that machine gun position when it mattered most." Paige's eyes closed again, consciousness fading as morphine and exhaustion overcame her remaining awareness, but her hands squeezed Tracy's with pressure that communicated understanding despite inability to form words. Captain Zachary Porter appeared at Tracy's shoulder, his uniform covered in dust and blood that belonged to Marines he'd commanded through the worst night of his career. "Shadow," he said, then corrected himself. "Corporal Sinclair, I wanted to meet you properly. Thank you, face to face rather than over radio." Tracy stood facing the officer who'd maintained tactical discipline through circumstances that would have broken less experienced leaders. "You don't need to thank me, sir. This is what Marines do. We protect each other regardless of rank, status, or institutional politics." "Maybe," Porter replied, "but you weren't officially part of any unit. You had no obligation to put yourself at risk for Marines you'd never met. Yet, you did it anyway. Kept us alive through 6 hours of combat that should have wiped us out in the first 30 minutes. That deserves recognition beyond simple gratitude." Lieutenant Holly Duncan approached with her wounded arm now properly bandaged by Lisa Patterson, the combat medic who'd accompanied Webb's rescue squad. Duncan's expression showed the mixture of pain and determination that marked officers who'd been injured but remained focused on their Marines rather than personal comfort. "Sir, all personnel accounted for," Duncan reported, 5 wounded requiring immediate evacuation, including Foster, myself, and 3 others with injuries that need treatment beyond field medicine capabilities. No Kia, no killed in action. 28 Marines had survived against odds that tactical assessment said should have resulted in catastrophic casualties and possible annihilation. They'd survived through professional discipline, courage that transcended training, and support from a disgraced sniper who'd proven that honor existed independent of institutional recognition. The distinctive sound of medevac helicopters approaching echoed through the canyon, their navigation lights visible against the darkness. Reed coordinated casualty loading with practice efficiency, ensuring that Paige Foster received priority based on medical necessity rather than rank or time in service. Tracy watched this organized chaos while processing her own emotional response to events that had transformed 4 years of isolation into something approaching redemption. She'd saved 28 lives, exposed Garrison's espionage operations, and proven, if only to herself, that the warrior she'd been before the betrayal still existed beneath 4 years of self-doubt and institutional disgrace. Norman's voice came through her satellite phone as she stood apart from the organized activity of casualty evacuation and prisoner processing. "Tracy, you did good work tonight, kid. Better than good. You saved those Marines and brought down Garrison's entire operation. That's what matters, regardless of what any court-martial said about your past. It doesn't change the official record." Tracy replied quietly, "I'm still dishonorably discharged, still carrying conviction for crimes I didn't commit." "About that," Norman said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Brennan's already filed paperwork requesting JAG review of your case based on evidence from Garrison's communications archive. She's got testimony from 3 witnesses who confirm that you are following orders based on falsified intelligence Garrison provided specifically to eliminate you as a threat to his operations. Your conviction is going to be overturned, Tracy. It's just a matter of time and bureaucratic processing." Tracy absorbed this information while watching Marines who'd survived because she'd chosen action over safety, commitment over self-preservation. The vindication mattered, but less than she'd imagined during 4 years of believing that clearing her name would restore what had been taken. Nothing could restore those 4 years or erase the psychological cost of betrayal and isolation, but she'd saved 28 lives tonight. That had to count for something beyond institutional recognition or bureaucratic acknowledgement of injustice. 3 weeks later, Tracy stood in Colonel Brennan's office at Forward Operating Base Rampart, wearing her utilities that had been cleaned and pressed for the first time in 4 years. The office was standard military efficiency, tactical maps on walls, operational orders organized in binders, awards and commendations that marked a career spent leading Marines through situations where courage and competence determined outcomes. Corporal Sinclair Brennan began formally, though her expression carried warmth that transcended professional courtesy. "JAG has completed its review of your case based on evidence from Garrison's operational archive and testimony from multiple witnesses. Your conviction has been overturned, and your discharge status changed from dishonorable to honorable. All documentation of the court-martial will be sealed, and your service record will reflect your actual performance rather than the falsified narrative that was constructed to protect criminal operations." Tracy felt emotion threatening to overwhelm professional composure. For years of anger and betrayal releasing in a way that left her unable to speak immediately. Additionally, Brennan continued, "I'm authorized to offer you reinstatement at your previous rank with full back pay and restoration of all privileges. The Marine Corps recognizes that institutional failures resulted in catastrophic injustice, and we're prepared to make whatever amends are possible given the circumstances." Tracy looked at the formal paperwork Brennan had placed on the desk. Reinstatement orders that would restore everything taken 4 years ago. The career, the rank, the identity that defined her before Garrison's betrayal stripped it away. But she thought about the observation post overlooking Wadi al-Shams, the isolated existence where she'd learned to survive on her own terms rather than institutional expectations. She thought about Norman Fletcher and his daughter Natalie, who become family during years when the Corps had been actively hostile. She thought about the clarity that came from operating without command oversight or rules of engagement written by lawyers who had never been shot at. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer," Tracy said carefully, "but I think I need time to consider whether returning to Corps is the right decision. I've changed during these 4 years, learned things about myself and the institution that makes simple reinstatement more complicated than paperwork can address." Brennan nodded with understanding that marked senior officers who navigated their own complicated relationships with the institution they served. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "The offer remains open indefinitely. And Tracy, regardless of what you decide about reinstatement, know that you've already proven everything that matters. You're a Marine in the ways that transcend rank or official status. That's something no court-martial or discharge can take away." 2 months later, Tracy sat on her observation post porch, watching the sun rise over mountains that had been home for 4 years of exile and redemption. The Barrett M40A5 leaned against the wall, within arm's reach. Some habits never change regardless of how circumstances evolved. Her satellite phone buzzed with incoming message. She smiled. recognizing the number as Captain Zachary Porter, who'd been persistent about maintaining contact despite the geographical distance between forward operating base Rampart and her isolated position. Foster got promoted to Lance Corporal. She's doing physical therapy and she'll be back to full duty in another month. She wanted me to tell you thank you again for that night. We all do. You gave us the gift of tomorrow when everything said we shouldn't survive to see it. Tracy typed a response with fingers that no longer trembled when she thought about that night. Tell Foster congratulations on her promotion. She earned it through courage under impossible circumstances. All of you did. I just provided the tactical support that helped your professionalism and determination survive long enough to matter. Norman's pickup appeared on the trail below, dust plume trailing behind like a signal fire. He'd been making these weekly visits for 4 years. But recently, Natalie had been joining him. The 15-year-old had insisted on meeting the woman her father talked about with mixture of pride and concern. Tracy climbed down to meet them, finding both Norman and Natalie waiting beside the truck with expressions that suggested they'd been discussing something important during the drive. "Morning, kid," Norman said, his weathered face creasing with a smile that marked someone genuinely pleased to see rather than performing social obligation. "Hi, Tracy." Natalie's enthusiasm transcended teenage reserve, the young woman embracing her with affection that 4 years ago would have seemed impossible for someone carrying the weight of dishonorable discharge. They climbed to the observation post together, Norman carrying supplies, while Natalie talked about school and friends with the comfortable familiarity that marked relationships where presence mattered more than conversation topics. So Norman said once they'd settled on the porch with coffee that was too strong and too hot, but perfect for morning conversations in mountain air. "Britton called me yesterday, said you still haven't decided about reinstatement." "I'm thinking about it," Tracy replied honestly. "The Corps gave me everything that mattered for 8 years and took it away through institutional failure that nearly destroyed me. Going back means trusting that same institution won't fail me again when political expediency demands convenient scapegoats." "That's fair," Norman acknowledged. "But the Corps is also 28 Marines who are alive because you chose to act when institutional authorization wouldn't have arrived in time. It's Colonel Brennan fighting to fix systemic problems that allowed Garrison's corruption. It's enlisted warriors like Webb and Bishop who judge you based on actions rather than paperwork. The institution failed you, but individuals within it proved that Marines still stand for something beyond politics." Natalie added her own perspective with a direct honesty that teenagers offer when not filtering thoughts through adult caution. "Dad says, you're one of the best Marines he's ever known, even when you weren't officially a Marine anymore. He says, honor isn't something the Corps gives you. It's something you carry inside that transcends whatever rank or status institutions assign. You prove that the night you saved those people." Tracy felt her throat tighten with emotion that 4 years of isolation hadn't prepared her to handle. Norman's words carried weight that transcended simple encouragement, touching on truths she'd been processing through months of evaluating whether reinstatement represented restoration or compromise of the independence she'd learned during exile. "I'm going to accept the reinstatement," she said finally, the decision crystallizing through conversation that made abstract considerations concrete. "But on my terms, I want assignment to training command where I can teach the next generation of snipers about the things they don't cover in curriculum. Tactical excellence matters, but so does a judgment and ethical framework that prevents skills from being misused. I want to help Marines avoid the institutional failures that nearly destroyed me." Norman nodded with satisfaction that suggested he'd been expecting this decision despite Tracy's months of deliberation. "That sounds like exactly the right role for someone who's learned hard lessons about the relationship between technical competence and moral authority. The Corps needs instructors who understand that creating warriors means more than teaching marksmanship fundamentals." 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Tracy Sinclair stood in front of her first class at Scout Sniper School, facing 24 students who represented the Marine Corps' commitment to developing precision marksmen capable of operating effectively in the most demanding combat environments. Her promotion to Staff Sergeant had come with the reinstatement, acknowledging the 4 years of service that should never have been interrupted by institutional betrayal. "Welcome to Scout Sniper School," she began, her voice carrying the authority that marked instructors who'd earned respect through demonstrated competence rather than assigned rank. Over the next 3 months, you're going to learn technical skills that separate adequate marksmen from professional snipers. But more importantly, you're going to learn judgment, the ethical framework that determines when to take shots, when to hold fire, and how to operate with honor even when institutional oversight isn't present to enforce standards. She paused, making eye contact with each student to emphasize the importance of what came next. Some of you will graduate from this course and spend careers never firing shots in combat. Others will face situations where your decisions determine whether American warriors live or die. All of you need to understand that being a sniper means more than technical excellence with rifle. It means being a Marine who makes impossible shots when lives depend on it, who maintains moral authority when operating alone, who understand that honor transcends rank or institutional recognition. In the back row, a young corporal raised her hand with tentative curiosity that marked students still uncertain about classroom dynamics. Staff Sergeant, is it true you saved an entire Marine company through precision fire from positions the enemy thought were impossible to access? Tracy smiled, recognizing the question as inevitable, given the attention her story had received after the classified details were cleared for discussion. What's true is that 28 Marines survived a situation they shouldn't have survived because professionals made good tactical decisions and maintained discipline through circumstances that exceeded their training and equipment capabilities. I provided support from elevated positions, but they won that fight through courage, competence, and the willingness to trust each other when institutional support couldn't arrive in time. That's what Marines do. We protect each other regardless of official authorization or convenient narratives about individual heroism. The students process this response with expressions that range from understanding to skepticism. The natural range that marked young warriors learning to evaluate complicated truths that training couldn't fully prepare them to comprehend. After class, Tracy walked to the base hospital where Paige Foster was completing her physical therapy. The young Lance Corporal having been transferred to stateside assignment that would allow her recovery while maintaining connection to Marines who'd survived that night in Wadishams. Staff Sergeant Sinclair. Paige's face lit up with recognition and affection that transcended normal interactions between NCOs and junior enlisted personnel. I didn't know you were teaching at the school now. Just started last month. Tracy replied, genuinely pleased to see the young Marine who'd nearly died during that engagement. How's the recovery progressing? Slow but steady, Paige said, gesturing to the physical therapy equipment that surrounded them. Doctors say I should be cleared for full duty in another 6 weeks. I'm actually hoping to try out for Scout Sniper School once I'm qualified. Figure if you can make those shots under impossible conditions. Maybe there's room for someone like me to learn the same skills. Tracy felt pride that transcended professional satisfaction, seeing the direct impact of her actions, inspiring the next generation of Marines to pursue specialized training that demanded excellence beyond standard qualification. When you're ready to apply, let me know, she said. I'll make sure your application gets proper consideration. The Corps needs snipers who understand that technical skills matter less than judgment and the willingness to use those skills in service of something larger than personal achievement. That evening, Tracy sat in the quarters that had been assigned with her reinstatement, reviewing lesson plans for the next day's class while monitoring the news that continued covering the fallout from Garrison's espionage operations. Multiple Defense Department officials had been implicated through his communications archive, resulting in investigations that reached into the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Her satellite phone buzzed with incoming call from Norman, who'd made these regular check-ins part of their relationship over the years. How's the first week treating you, Staff Sergeant? Norman asked, his voice carrying pride that marked mentors watching students succeed beyond their original expectations. Challenging but rewarding, Tracy replied honestly, teaching requires different skills than operating. But I'm finding that sharing lessons learned matters more than I expected. These students need to understand that being a sniper means carrying responsibility that transcends shooting qualifications. Sounds like you found your calling, Norman observed. Not everyone gets a chance to transform personal adversity into something that helps others avoid similar mistakes. The Corps is lucky to have you back, Tracy. Those students don't know it yet, but they're learning from someone who's proven that honor matters more than institutional recognition. After the call ended, Tracy walked to her window overlooking the training ranges where tomorrow's class would practice the fundamentals that separated adequate marksmen from professional snipers. She thought about the observation post in the mountains, the isolated existence that had been home during 4 years of exile and redemption. That place would always be there, waiting if she needed distance from institutional expectations and political complications that made military service more challenging than tactical training suggested. But for now, she had students to train, lessons to share, and the opportunity to help young Marines avoid the institutional failures that had nearly destroyed her. The Corps hadn't been perfect, had failed her through corruption and political expediency that valued convenience over truth, but it had also produced warriors like Porter, Duncan, Bishop, and Webb, who'd proven that individual Marines still embodied the values that transcended institutional shortcomings. Her phone buzzed with text message from Captain Porter, now stationed stateside after his deployment to Forward Operating Base Rampart had ended. Our company is having a reunion next month. All the Marines from that night in Wadial Shams, plus the QRF personnel who extracted us. You're the guest of honor, whether you want to be or not. These people need to thank you properly face-to-face without radio communications and tactical emergencies preventing real conversation. Tracy smiled, typing her response with fingers that no longer trembled when she thought about that night. I'll be there, but I'm not the guest of honor. All of you are. You're the Marines who held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. I just provided the tactical support that helped your courage and professionalism survive long enough to matter. She set the phone down and looked at the Marine Corps emblem on her wall. Eagle, globe, an anchor that represented values she believed in before Garrison's betrayal, had questioned during 4 years of exile and had rediscovered through actions that proved honor existed independent of institutional recognition. Staff Sergeant Tracy Shadow, Sinclair had come home to the Corps, not because institutions were perfect or justice always prevailed, but because Marines were worth fighting for, regardless of official status or convenient narratives about individual heroism. That lesson had been learned through 4 years of isolation and one night of combat that changed everything about how she understood the relationship between personal honor and institutional service. The mountains of Jabal al-Gharat would always be there waiting if she needed distance from expectations and politics. But for now, she had Marines to train, lessons to share, and the satisfaction that came from transforming personal adversity into something that helped others avoid similar mistakes. Some promises couldn't be broken. Some oaths transcended discharge papers and court-martial convictions. Some warriors never stopped being Marines, regardless of what institutions said about their status or reputation. Tracy had proven that truth through 53 precision shots over 14 hours of sustained combat, saving 28 lives while exposing espionage operations that reached into the highest levels of Defense Department leadership. But the real proof came from her decision to return to the Corps and share those lessons with the next generation of warriors who would face their own impossible situations and need to understand that honor mattered more than institutional recognition. The ghost had returned from exile, not seeking vengeance or personal vindication, but offering the hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving betrayal and choosing to serve despite institutional failures. That was the legacy that mattered. Not the shots taken or enemies eliminated, but the Marines trained and the values preserved through actions that transcended rank, status, or official authorization. Tomorrow, she would teach students about windage compensation and range estimation. But more importantly, she would teach them about judgment, ethics, and the warrior code that separated professional Marines from merely competent technicians with rifles. That was what mattered. That was what would last beyond any individual career or combat engagement. That was how one disgraced sniper transformed 4 years of exile into redemption. That helped ensure the next generation would be better prepared for the institutional failures and moral challenges that awaited them. The sun set over the training ranges, and Staff Sergeant Tracy Sinclair prepared for tomorrow's class with a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what mattered most. Some ghosts never disappeared. They just found new missions worth fighting for. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.